in purple and gold.
And catch the live decision making over the next few months on OTB AM, live every weekday at 7:30 AM on OTB Sports Radio.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
It's Wednesday, the 6th of May. You're very welcome along to OTB AM. I'm Ger and Eoin here with you alongside Owen Sheehan every morning from 7:30 until 10. During lockdown, if you want to get in touch with us, you can WhatsApp the show. 087 180 180 is the number. Or, of course, if you're watching us on YouTube, you can leave a comment underneath us. If you're on Twitter or Periscope, you can leave comments there as well. Use the hashtag OTBAM and we'll pick them up. We also broadcast live every morning on Facebook too. Very busy show for you. Gangs of London is the hit new show from Sky. And Joe Cole, the star of that, not the footballer, the actor, joins us today for our Now TV OTB Culture Hall of Fame, where we ask people to put something in the OTB Culture Hall of Fame. A movie they liked, a TV series, whatever it is that they actually want to do. And today he's putting City of God, that amazing Brazilian movie from the noughties, the middle of the noughties I think it would have been, with a stunning soundtrack. And we're going to talk to him obviously about Gangs of London, where he plays a very seminal role in the whole thing. That's coming your way around about 9 o'clock. After that, we're going to finish with some controversy because, well, we know, we like to stoke a little bit of controversy, particularly when it comes to OTB's Mount Rushmore. This morning it's Louth. It seems fairly straightforward. They have one of the most decorated rugby players of all time in Rob Kearney. They have Ian Hart, Gary Kelly, and they also have Steve Staunton. And that's it. It's done. You're done. You don't need to do any more than that. But apparently, Ronan Mullen and Dan McDonnell, two proud, fiercely proud Louthmen, have decided that that's not good enough for them and they wanted to discuss this. So we're going to be coming back to that around about 9:30 this morning. Loads more coming your way as well, including news from the Premier League and the Bundesliga and some return to play protocols that are going to be adopted to allow Premier League footballers back training this week with a view to playing games probably early June. The Bundesliga looks like it might be back as early as next 10 days. So there is sport on the horizon, finally. That's all coming your way in just a little while. But every week for the last 5 or 6 weeks, Paul Rouse has joined Joe Malloy on Tuesday evenings to talk about the history of Irish sport. And last night they got into the GAA, this is the whole kit and caboodle. This is the Hayes Hotel and everything that happened in between. So sit back, relax and enjoy this.
So Maurice Davin, then you mentioned, was the other driving figure. We all know the Davin stand.
Yeah, Davin met Cusack for the first time in 1875 at the first ever international athletics competition, which was between Ireland and England, and it was staged at Lansdowne Road. And Davin was the preeminent athlete of that generation. He only took to athletics at 29. Before that, he'd been born during the years of the famine as well. He was slightly older than Cusack, but born in the 1840s. But he was born to middle class prosperity on a largish farm down near Carrick on shore in Tipperary. As well as having a farm, his family had a river haulage business. So they used to run teams of horses and pull barges between Clonmel and Carrick, pull the goods back and forward. His father died when he was 18, and Davin took control of the family farm. And Davin was absolutely the opposite of Cusack in terms of personality. So Cusack was rash, impulsive, fighting with everybody. Davin was studious, organised, subscribed to encyclopedias, kept a record of everything, had learned how to play the violin, studied amateur boxing. And when he took to athletics at 29, he had already won a series of regattas on the coastal lines and on river towns all around the south east of Ireland in a boat that he had built himself. This is the type of man that he was. But he took to athletics at 29. He subscribed to newspapers and other encyclopedias to look at training things. And on his farm, he constructed a gymnasium for himself in the 1870s. So you can still see the dumbbells are still kept down there, the weights on Wallace's farm near Carrick. And later, actually, he built a pitch. It's like if you build it, they will come type thing. He built a pitch on his farm where 2 All-Ireland finals, but Kilkenny actually won their first All-Ireland hurling final on the pitches beside Davin's house, which staged All-Ireland finals. But Davin was utterly meticulous. He kept a diary, which is in the Croke Park Museum, of the training that he did. He won 10 Irish championships in a row. in weight throwing events. That was his skill. He won 2 English 3As championships, which were the equivalent of world championships at this period. He was considered the best all-round athlete, essentially the best all-around athlete in the world. And there's a brilliant letter that he got from English athletes who asked, was he intending to come over to compete in this year's championship? Because if they wasn't going to bother training. He was that formidable. And his 2 brothers, Tom and Pat, were also outstanding athletes. Tom was the brother who almost got away. He didn't do quite as much training as the other 2. Pat broke the world high jump record in Munster Evan in 1882. So these were incredibly talented people. And Morris was the driving force, the great celebrated Irish athlete of the late 1870s and early 1880s.
Wow. Very impressive. So not just a couple of lads who said, let's get together and form our own association. They thought deeply about things very clearly. Smart, brilliant men. You said that Davin and Cusack first met in 1875. So we're 9 years shy of Hayes' Hotel in 1884. Were they firm friends across those 9 years? How did they decide to come together and form this association? What's the backdrop? What's their thinking?
This is a really tangled story. So the short version of it is that they weren't close friends. They had their life, they did their things. But by the early 1880s, the Irish athletic scene, which had promised so much in the 1870s, was beginning to drift into a couple of problems. First of all, there was no governing body had been set up to organise standards of race meetings, to organise the controls of it. And into this vacuum, in 1881 and 1882, was coming the English Amateur Athletic Association. Now, ordinarily, this would not have been necessarily a massive problem, except it was a problem here for several reasons. First of all, the English Amateur Athletic Association had in its rules that athletics events would take place on Saturdays and never on Sundays, which obviously was a problem for rural Ireland, where Sunday was the traditional day of leisure. Number 2, English athletic events were predominantly, they were given more to running than to throwing events, and I think this mattered in terms of the nature of the throwing events which were organised across Ireland. And number 3, there were issues around who actually could compete over these, because in English 3A events, they were becoming increasingly elitist in the nature of who would be allowed to compete in events. And of course, the spectre of amateurism and professionalism began to raise its head. Now, we shouldn't go down that particular rabbit hole today. I know we have to talk about money in sport in the coming weeks. We should just leave that for the moment. But the context matters here, and the context here is land and freedom in Ireland. You have 1879 to 1882, and onwards after 1882, a land war in which you get the beginning of a revolution of land ownership, in which the people of Ireland have been renting land as tenant farmers to around 5,000 landlords over time. And you get the beginning of a land revolution, the introduction of law, which takes 30, 40, 50 years, but it eventually means the transfer of the ownership of the land of Ireland to people who actually farm that land rather than to landlords. So that's there in the background. Number 2, the rise of the Irish Parliamentary Party under Charles Stewart Parnell, and the sense that for the first time since 1800, there is this sense that there can be a parliament in Dublin, that there will be a home rule parliament, that it will not just be Ireland taking laws from Westminster and sending representatives across. And all the while, the Irish Republican Brotherhood are there fomenting ideas around revolution. So those 3 things matter as ideas, as our political and land, around politics and around nationality and around land. And behind that, again, there was a cultural revolution beginning to ferment. So you see an organisation founded in 1882 called Aontacht na Gaeilge, which talked about re-establishing the Irish language as a spoken language across a broad swathe of the country. In 1882, you get the idea that there should be an Irish industrial exhibition. So this isn't just, the idea was that the British control the world of industry. But this was an attempt by Irish nationalists to say, well, we can produce industrial goods as well. And they demonstrated them in Dublin, very close to where Cusack lived. So you get this idea of a kind of a growing sense of Irishness in 1882. And that notion of the 3As, the Amateur Athletic Association, from pushing its rules across, grated on people who were looking for home rule in other aspects of their life.
Okay. So that's the backdrop and the ethos then is relatively clear. I'm sure some had stronger IRB leanings towards others, but there's a cultural aspect to this as well. They need to figure out what games they're going to play. Athletics you've mentioned, and the significance of Irish athletics. Where is hurling at this stage? I mean, like we've talked before, and so it wasn't just invented, it was a thing, but as I understand it, it had largely disappeared in advance of 1884.
Well, if you look at what was happening with hurling, well, first of all, we should say the GAA was founded. It was called the Gaelic Athletic Association for the Cultivation and Preservation of the National Pastimes, to give it its full title when it was established in 1884. And its primary focus through 1885 was athletics, was the staging of athletics competitions all around Ireland and pulling in athletic events into the organisation in standardising rules for running and jumping and throwing events, and opening those events, holding them on Sundays and opening them, as they said, to Irish people of every class. It dominated the business of the GAA for those years. But two other sports were pulled in to the organisation. So we'll talk about Gaelic football, if that's okay, first for a second.
Yeah.
Gaelic football, the first rules for Gaelic football, initially called Irish football, were written by Maurice Davin and published or put before a meeting of the GAA on the 17th of January 1885 and published in the newspaper subsequently, and then later in the early spring published in pamphlet form and disseminated around the country. Now, these were very loose, very vague rules, and the reality of it was that they weren't massively different rules than rugby and soccer. You could see the similarities between these games. But why was it thrown in the mix? Well, it was thrown in the mix as an idea by Maurice Davin, who hated rugby. He thought rugby was a demoralising, denationalising game, and it wasn't something that that it needed to be cleaned up. And he liked the grand old, as he called them, the grand old Irish kicking games. So that mattered. What also mattered is that in 1884, routinely, year after year, from 1874 onwards, Ireland had played England in rugby match and then in soccer matches, and were getting trounced. Epic score lines, failing even to score most times they played. And there was the argument that, well, you know, maybe we need to change the rules a bit. Maybe when we play England, we should play 17 players and they play 13, and that will make it a more, you know, so this was set up as something that was a rival game to rugby and ultimately, I suppose, to soccer as well. So that's where Gaelic football comes from. Now, hurling is a really different story, and it's a complicated enough story, except to say, so we'll run through this pretty quickly, but if you read official histories of the GAA, and if you look at the museum, you get the sense that hurling had disappeared after the famine. That hurling was something that had been lost kind of in the wake of the spread of English games, in the wake of emigration, and the number of people who died. And there was basically a demoralisation in society, and that Michael Cusick had rode into the countryside here and basically salvaged a game that had been lost to history. And the reality is much more complex than that, because hurling hadn't disappeared from a number of places. They hadn't disappeared in North Tipperary. If you read the Nina Guardian from the 1850s and the 1860s, you can see the number of hurling matches that are being played in those areas. If you look at East Galway, hurling is still being played there. In North Kerry, as late as 1882, you see entries in local landlords' books of hurling being played on the land. Around Cork City, there are elements of hurling. There are little pockets of hurling in Laois and in Offaly and Westmeath. And then if you go up to the north, you see both in West Donegal and in East Antrim, remnants of stick and ball games still being played on an annual basis, called by different names, Commonwealth in Donegal. Yeah. So this game had not disappeared. What it hadn't done is modernised.
It's amazing you're still plucking out parts of the country where you still very much associate with hurling, isn't it?
This is exactly it. It's the geography of hurling it is one of the great questions that must be asked of the GAA. If hurling is such a great game, why is it not played in more places around the country than that? And it is the question that is worth repeatedly asking. Now, we have to go back and look at the other aspects of hurling in the country, because hurling was also played in Irish emigrant communities. There was a hurling league in Melbourne with a set of rules that was established in all of those areas. Places like Collingwood, places that we consider now of Australian rules teams, they had a hurling league with a set of rules that was played through the late 1870s. In Boston, the Boston Hurling Cup was played in 1880, 1881, 82, 83, and into 1884 when there was a massive dispute for this Gold Cup, which made it to the Boston courts because a team which had won it 3 times in a row insisted on keeping this Gold Cup. And there was around the courts over that. So that tells you that hurling was modernising in those places. And there was an element of modernisation of a type here because there was a hurley club active in Trinity College from 1870 onwards into the early 1880s. Now, that is sometimes considered hurling and sometimes not, depending on what your argument is. It has led somebody such as Edward Carson played on that team, the founding father of modern unionism in Ulster, and it has sometimes led to the statement that, sure, didn't Edward Carson play Fitzgibbon Cup hurling for Trinity? And the answer, of course, is that he didn't. He played a game in Trinity where they used hockey goals. They could strike with one side of the stick only, and they could be offside, and they had looked as well to England for the rules. But this game of hurling had spread out of Trinity College into schools such as the High School and King's Hospital, and had spread into banks and prosperous suburbs of the south side of Dublin, possibly up to 14 teams at all, who founded the Irish Hurley Union in 1879. Some of those players from that Hurley Union came together with Michael Cusick in late 1882 and founded the Dublin Hurling Club at the Royal College of Surgeons. And the idea was that they would make a game which combined what they called the science of hurling. They would bring back hurling basically to the city of Dublin. So hurling would be it would continue, but hurling was considered to be a distinctive game and it was played. It fell apart in mutual loathing. Cusick thought that these guys were basically softies and not really racy of the soil, as he considered himself, and Cusick himself by return was deemed a savage. So they didn't meet, the club fell apart. Later in 1883, Cusick took the hurleys that had been made from that club and he went up to the Wellington Monument in the Phoenix Park on a Saturday afternoon in early October 1883, and he had with him 3 other people. The Mullen brothers, Pat and Tom from Clare, and a guy called L.C. Slevin from Armagh, and the 4 of them started to puck the ball around. And they met again the following Saturday, and the following Saturday. Cusick advertised it in the newspapers for which he was writing and in other newspapers, and people slowly began to join across those weeks. So week after week, there were enough people through. He changed and now uses school to set up the Cusick's Academy Hurling Club, and then he founded the Metropolitan Hurling Club out of those people who were coming together on Saturday afternoons in the Phoenix Park. And Cusick was later to write that it was out of these metropolitan hurlers that the game of hurling was and the Gaelic Athletic Association was formed. But it wasn't just from there. There's another element of the story which matters, which ties in the traditions of play across rural Ireland and Cusick's modernisation of sport through the Metropolitan Hurling Club. And it happened on Easter Monday, 1884, because the people who were in Galway in Collimer in Galway, had seen what Michael Cusick had done in Dublin, and they'd written to Cusick and challenged them for a match on the Fair Green in Ballinasloe on Easter Monday, 1884. So Cusick named his team in the paper, took the train down to Dublin, was met at the train station on Easter Monday morning by a whole lot of the hurlers from Collimer, and they were marched down from the train station to the Fair Green behind the brass band, and the 2 teams, 21 aside, lined up in the middle of the field for the ball to be thrown in. The ball was thrown in between the hurlers of Collimer and the Metropolitan hurlers from Dublin, most of whom were countrymen living in the city. And the Collimer men just, for the first few minutes, just took complete control, drove the ball into Cusick's end of the field, scored a goal, and were running around the place celebrating. When Cusick just said, "What are you doing? Like, what game are you playing? This is not how you play hurling," and instructed the Collimer men to leave the field so his team could give a demonstration of how hurling should be played amongst themselves. The Collimer men then said after a few minutes, "Well, we don't really see the difference, so you stand aside and watch us play." So they went out and played. The upshot of it was Cusick understood immediately that his team were not on a winner here. So he did what any sensible manager would do, and he took his team home. He took them straight off the pitch. They went back up to the train station and went back to Dublin in the train. Meanwhile, the Collimer men went out on horse-drawn carriages out to Collimer, where bonfires blazed, and they drank long into the night and had a Gold Cup. Now, this would matter. this matters for two reasons. It matters obviously because it's the old and the new coming together. But what happened after that were letters to the newspapers which said, this grand old game, we must revive it. We cannot let this die. This is centuries of our tradition. We have to put this in with an organisation. And Cusack hit on this idea of pulling in hurling beside athletics into his establishment of the Gaelic Athletic Association.
Wow. Amazing. So 1884, over the next, say, 15 years as we get into 20th century, does this thing explode and thrive? Is it all classes of society? Because, even one of the great things about the GAA now is I don't associate it with any class of people, for instance. So was that always the case? Did it catch on, or was this a slow burner?
Oh, it caught on. It in Cusack's own words, it spread like a prairie fire across the country. Now, within that statement hides a whole lot of hidden truths around places where it didn't catch on. And the GAA, you still needed a certain amount of disposable income to play sport. You still do, and you did even at that stage. And there are stories of clubs from Meath, for example, writing saying, look, we would love to join, but our main can't afford the subscription fee. So it's not just, and you need a certain amount of money to be able to travel. On the morning of the first ever All-Ireland hurling final, 7 of the Thurles team were left on the platform because they did not get their expenses for earlier matches, and there was a row in the camp. So this is allowing for that. The GAA was more democratic than other sporting organisations. It opened itself out much more successfully than others did. It created a broad base, and crucially, it provided a day out. And this idea of a day out on a Sunday was essential to the spread of the organisation. So it became a thing to go to matches, to march behind the band. The parade you now see in Croke Park, squeezed into a playing field, is a parade that used to take place through the towns. Players used to tog out in hotels or in pubs or wherever in the middle of a town, or they used to march from train stations behind marching bands. And that marching band, that parade behind them, was kind of like a colourful Pied Piper, drawing people to the place where the game would be played, and then they would pay it in. And you would often have multiple matches, football and hurling matches played together, athletics events on the sidelines, hawkers selling their wares, gamblers, or gambling stations all along the side of the field, even people selling drink at matches during those early years. So it became a huge day out for people across rural Ireland, and also in urban Ireland, where people came together, and Dublin became a huge focal point for the association, for the playing of big matches and for the organisation of those games. In those early years, though, the GAA did almost collapse in the early 1890s, when there was a massive split in the organisation between radical Republicans who sought to take control of the organisation and others who saw it as a sporting organisation. And it almost pulled the association asunder. There was talk of it disbanding, and particularly in the wake of the Parnell split, which saw the Irish parliamentary pulled asunder after divorce proceedings around Parnell and Catherine O'Shea, and the manner in which that destroyed the Irish parliamentary party and left members of the GAA taking sides. Only 3 counties attended the annual convention in 1892, for example. Very few teams were entering the All-Ireland Football and Hurling Championships. But broadly speaking, the story through the 1880s and the 1890s is the story of a modern sports organisation essentially hating those British sports organisations that it can see around it in terms of its structure, in terms of the codification of games, the organisation of championships and of grounds, imitating them, but doing it in an Irish way.
Amazing, yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. One last quick one. How quickly does the church get on board, and we have bishops throwing the balls in and all this kind of stuff?
Depends on the church. The church almost destroyed the GAA in 1887. There was a massive fight. The GAA's annual convention in 1887 was held in November in the Thurles courthouse, and it ended up in a free fight between Republicans and churchmen. The churchmen, they was really clever. Cusack and Davin really cleverly got Archbishop Croke, the most popular cleric, on board at the beginning of the organisation. They took him in as patron, and Croke wrote a brilliant letter, which is still published it's an extraordinary letter. He is still published in the GAA's official guide, which is in itself extraordinary, that it is still published there, where he talked about foreign games being kind of effeminate follies, and that such games were played by degenerate dandies So it was, and Croke had this idea that, you must go back to the sports of the Irish. So he was utterly in favour of this idea of the GAA. But there were other bishops who hated the GAA because they viewed Sunday now as turning into sports and drinks. And it was not something that they wished to see. And they viewed it, they did not want their parishioners also going over to an organisation which it saw in part constructed around radical Republicans and a recruiting ground for such Republicans.
Okay. This is our Archbishop Croke, presumably Croke Park, Archbishop Croke, is it?
This is Archbishop Croke. Croke Park was it's a 1913. It was called after him at that stage, but he's the first patron. The first four patrons of the GAA were Parnell, obviously the leader of the Irish Parliamentary Party. Archbishop Thomas Croke is the leading and most popular Catholic cleric in the country, and Michael Davitt as the leader of the Land League, and later John O'Leary, who is the Irish Republican Brotherhood. So it was a real kind of, this is the context. You see in their patronage, you see the context. And this idea of having a patron, it's essentially imitating what the British did. You see sports clubs established here. Who's the patron of the Enniscorthy Tennis Club? It's the Lord Lieutenant of Dublin, or Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, who is the British representative in the place. It's a natural, normal thing to do.
Yeah, those patrons is a very instructive Venn diagram of the various aspects of Irish life. And those bishops were right, because pretty soon people are going to Mass on a Saturday to get it out of the way for Sunday matches. I mean, they were onto something. They knew how it would go.
Well, there was much, Croke made much of the fact that that no GAA man would miss Mass on a Sunday before he could go play a match. Well, they must have gone to Mass very early if they were going on towards their matches.
Paul, that's week 6. I presume invariably the GAA will find its way into future conversations because it's just so seismic if we're talking about 20th century Irish sport.
Well, I think the place to go next, and we have to talk about the GAA in this as well, is I think the next place we have to go to is money. Because there is money everywhere in this new sports revolution. And I think it's really interesting to see what happens to the GAA, to soccer, to rugby, but also to other sports and industries. And this idea of amateurism and professionalism. What is amateurism? Where did it come from? Why are you amateur? Why are you not amateur? Why are you a professional? What is a profession? All of those things. We'll probably talk about that next week. And I think the week after that, we spoke hugely about men today. And if you go through the entirety of the minute books of the GAA for most of its first 100 years, the only woman mentioned is Maud Gonne, and that's for nationalist reasons. So you look at, this is a man's world that was being constructed, but an alternative women's world of sport emerges as well. So we'll talk about that. Okay. And then I think the following week it'll be sport and war.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station.
Looking for a football show with a bit of a twist?
So I know the likes of Griezmann's big into his fashion.
He wanted a lot. One question he actually asked me was, could he make his studs light up when he runs?
Team 33, the football magazine show for the football purists.
Yeah, the Nike Mercurials from 1998. If you just show that boot to an entire generation of people, and they just get instantly nostalgic and remember everything from that era.
The very best interviews with the cult heroes of the past, and a look at the cultural side of football. Team 33, live at 9 p.m. every Friday on OTB Sports Radio.
OTB AM.
Right, it's 7:58. If you've just joined us, then you've missed a great conversation with Paul Rouse about the history of the GAA. It's part of our ongoing weekly series where Paul Rouse essentially delivers the lecture course that he would deliver if you were a student at UCD, and it's been fascinating stuff so far. We'll put that up for you, available on all of our podcast streams on the OTB Podcast Network, wherever you get your podcast. The best place for us, for you to listen, is obviously on the Go Loud app, or indeed on offtheball.com/podcast. But you can just subscribe wherever it is that you're getting them at the moment. Eoin, good morning to you. How you doing?
Very well, Ger. How are you keeping?
Good, yeah. There's fairly hard evidence that we're about to see some Bundesliga action in the next 10 days or so. There's a meeting this morning at 11 o'clock where they expect to announce that they're going to be back playing.
Time to hop on each and every German bandwagon you can possibly find. A very efficient bandwagon, I presume, is how people would describe those sort of things.
Sleek, well-designed.
Absolutely. Lots of people to be able to be carried on these bandwagons right to the very top. Like I think you made a fairly strong case yesterday that Hertha Berlin should be the bandwagon. Like you said, it would be a great place to live as a footballer, but really it'd be a much better place to live as a football fan. That could be that could be a great excuse to your close family, Ger, saying, I'm actually off to go support my football team. They're like, where are you off to St. Conleth's Park? No, off to Berlin for the weekend. So I think that could be the possible bandwagon that we could get on.
Okay, I appreciate that bandwagon, but then Dortmund has to be the bandwagon because
I've never been. So you obviously have been. Like I think once you see the yellow wall in full flow in actual glorious real life, then you presumably can't go back from that.
So I haven't seen Dortmund play there. I saw the German national team play there in a World Cup semi-final. And so they didn't even have to stand. They weren't allowed to stand, but they were still standing and bouncing. And it was like, wow, this is unbelievable. Imagine what it would be like with another 20,000 fans and everybody dressed in yellow. So when this is over, Eoin, that's on my bucket list.
I think a lot of people's bucket lists are going to include a lot of things when this is over. But it's a good shout. Like, I mean, it's fairly, I don't know, mainstream, isn't it? To pick a bandwagon now, just say, yeah, support Dortmund. Like, got to do better than that. You've got to stay away from one of the big two. The Berlin
is like an excellent culty kind of band. I said culty kind of bandwagon, and the type of thing that you would enjoy. Like Berlin's a great city, as you know. You've spent many the dawn in a darkened room alongside a lot of men with their tops off, dancing away.
We did. I did have tickets to go see Union Berlin at one stage when I was over there, but we realised a little bit too late that the game was kicking off at midday, which was obviously an ungodly hour for any game to kick off in such a city like Berlin. So we missed that by about 7 hours, I think.
Okay. There's a couple of things we do need to talk about at the top of the show here. Obviously, we're going to be getting to Louth's Mount Rushmore. I've made the case that it was a very straightforward one. I think it is relatively straightforward. There should be no controversy today. Ronan Mullen and Dan McDonnell, we can trust them both, right?
100%. What like when you say lack of controversy, what are you thinking?
Steve Staunton, Gary Kelly, Ian Hart, Rob Kearney. Job done.
Yeah, that's pretty much it, isn't it? Is there anybody on the periphery there for you?
Mount Rushmore fullbacks. There you go. As Emma points out.
That's a good point. And who's your number 5, for example?
I don't know anything about their Gaelic football pedigree, but apparently they have some.
Apparently so.
I like what Paul Rouse did. He was like, I have to have seen them. So that gets you out of jail. Suddenly it's like, well, I don't need to know anything about the history. It's like, no, I just need to have seen them. That's my criteria here.
I think that's fair enough. I think colour television or whatever is a fairly good a fairly good place to go in terms of your locking down criteria. Like I think what you said there is what it's going to be, isn't it? It's like I'm struggling to think of anybody who might actually crack that top 4.
Somebody on YouTube says the 1957 All-Ireland winning captain Dermot O'Brien. If you're of a certain age, then obviously delivering All-Ireland glory to a county like Louth, that is something that probably deserves a place on that county's sporting Mount Rushmore. And Michael Native also on YouTube says Paul Rice's content is really excellent. Thank you. Well, you can subscribe to highlights from Off the Ball for our History of Sport series. Oh, and it's not like Kerry to miss an opportunity. And I think that it's important that we bring this to a much wider audience, the widest possible audience at the moment, to bring out the old painful sores of the noughties. And you said Pat Spillane going on TV calling, did he call Tyrone or Armagh puke football? I can't even remember which one it was. That this was actually...
It's Tyrone. It was one of the most famous moments in the history
who cares?
Of GA punishment, but who cares?
I mean,
move on. It doesn't matter. Tyrone, Armagh, tomato, I guess is what you were trying to say.
Yeah, they all beat Kerry in All-Ireland finals over a number of years. It was indistinguishable.
That was a semi-final, but anyway, it's okay.
And this seems now at what remove? So was that 03? Is that what you're saying? Is that when
that would have been 2003.
2003. So here we are, 17 years later, and this still is an issue that rankles in Kerry and causes rancour.
I wouldn't say that. I think Kerry people are doing the right thing, flying the flag for great, graceful football and trying to rid the world of the stain that is puke football. We have an opportunity now to reconnect with ourselves, to reconnect with our loved ones, to reconnect with great football and peace our priest, I should say, was doing a webcam mass over the last couple of days where I'm sure you have the tweet there to have a dig at puke football.
So this is from @Ciaraic on Twitter, CACIARAIOCH, a brilliant follow.
That'd be Ciaraic.
Ciaraic.
Which is obviously the Irish for a Kerry person.
Okay, for a Kerry person. Right.
Yes.
Streaming a local Padre Pio Mass for the father, and the priest has taken an opportunity during the sermon to take a dig at puke football because not even a pandemic can stop the righteous GAA begrudgery of a Kerry man. She's bang on. Righteous begrudgery. This is perfect. This is exactly what it is. Is it self-righteous begrudgery, actually? Is that more accurate, Eoin?
I think you're completely missing the point here. The priest streaming the Padre Pio tribute act is actually bang on here. Thank you to Padre Pio Mass guy, because these are the stains that need to be wiped out. If there is a higher being that can help us out with puke football, then I'm on board. I will certainly be tuning into the next Padre Pio cover band to actually get my helping of anti-puke football. Because, as I say, like, we can purify our soul, whether it's doing a lunchtime workout, whether it's cooking a healthy recipe for you and your family, or whether it's coming up with ways to rid the world of puke football. You too can make a difference during this lockdown.
And did Kerry manage to rid the world of puke football in that era, or did puke football actually become the dominant discourse?
What I'm talking about now, this is the opportunity right now. Like, we will have the proof will be in the pudding when football comes back, I'm sure, because Padre Pio upstairs will have helped us all out to actually rid the world of puke football. Any manager who was considering playing a blanket defence, say at the end of this year, will have an awakening where Padre Pio appears in his dreams and is like, do not play puke football, play a fast brand of attacking football. And that manager will follow those orders.
Look, I realise that you're suffering from delusions of self-aggrandising grandeur here. But all joking aside, do you think actually there's going to be any manager in the country who in November, when the first game of inter-county football comes back, is like, oh, look, I'll tell you what we're going to do. You've been waiting all year to play football, and I'm sending you out to have 15 men behind the ball. I mean, I know you were joking, but, like, think about it. Follow that through. Like, surely nobody's going to be like, OK, what we're going to do here is we're going to go out and we're going to thwart, we're going to, like, stand on their toes and we're going to spit at them, essentially. I don't think any player is going to stand for that. This is actually this is a chance. This is a moment for us all to go, let us be entertained.
It's
You've stumbled upon the truth here, Eoin.
That's it. There's in the basketball episode of the US Office, Michael Scott won't let Kevin play basketball, and at the end of the episode, it cuts to Kevin shooting hoops, and he knocks down about 5 consecutive shots from big distance. That's what it's going to be like for a GEA at the end of this year. We're going to have players who have been locked away in a wardrobe of blanket defence for years, coming out with the shackles off them firmly and showing the country how good they really are. Kind of like how we've seen someone like Shane Wallace, for example, when we got a little bit of a glimpse of the league at the start of this year, just going to a whole new level. That this is going to be the consequence of this. Like, I'm personally thanking Padre Pio for this. You're thanking the lockdown for this. But it would be astonishing if they're like, right, we have been locked away for so long. Time to just get bodies behind the ball, pass the ball off, take the easy pass, and make sure to just to track back, and I don't care what else you do. That will kind of defeat the whole purpose. I think sport will certainly be an exercise of joy more than anything else when we come back.
It better be, because there will be no forgiveness for it, or otherwise. John Gorman says Des Smith, European Tour winner, should be on the Mount Rushmore from Louth. Robbie Morton, hey Robbie, how you doing? Says replace the last on your list with Joe Martin on and off the pitch at Dundalk hero. Joey Donnelly says Tom McConville, Barry Keogh, Staunton, Frank Lynch. If some other nonsense has to be thrown a bone, I don't know which bit is the nonsense. And so it is Staunton, Gary Kelly, Stephen White and Rob Kearney. Is that Stephen White? Is that the Stephen White who put Kildare to the sword, or was there a previous generation? Maybe somebody out there who knows and is watching this morning a bit more about Louth football can get in touch and tell us that. 087 180 180 is the number to WhatsApp us with any of your content this morning that you'd like to talk to us about, or any of our content indeed. Should we talk about one last thing, normal people? I see normal people being referred to casually in the London Times this morning as like in a kind of what the world's sporting coaches are doing piece, while normal people are watching normal people was the line. And you're like, this has permeated the global culture like no other piece of Irish pop culture has ever that I can remember in such a short space of time. Like 6 weeks ago, did people know what Normal People was? Really? I mean, they knew it was a book, but did most people know it was a book? Probably not.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think what is up there, like in terms of pure. So certainly in terms of Irish television, or okay, it's not technically not Irish television, but a television show set in Ireland that is so Irish, despite obviously it's
Irish director, Irish book, mostly Irish actors, mostly Irish crew. So there's some British money involved in making it happen. Fair enough, but like
but to all intents and purposes, it's Irish. It's an Irish product, and certainly an Irish advertisement. No, there hasn't been anything, certainly not on television, that has gone around the world so quickly. And obviously, it's attached to the book, and I think the reason why it's had such a global appeal is because of the book. And you do have the big players and all the global media who are very familiar with the novel and are then interested in how the television show turns out. But really, you take that's only an opportunity. It doesn't automatically mean that it is a worldwide success. You have to take that opportunity, and Jesus, they've absolutely done that. It's I presume that the only sort of negative commentary has been those rather entertaining people on Liveline last week, because I just think as a piece of work it's absolutely exceptional. And if you want to go back to the idea that it is an ad for Ireland, it's an unbelievable advertisement, and it just looks stunning as well as everything else.
Yeah, the papers are full of just how good a footballer Paul Mescal was. He's become kind of the great white whale of Kildare football. A bigger loss to us apparently than Larry Tompkins is kind of how I'm reading the papers this morning. I'm like, really? Is that? Was he that good? Because that would actually be a sickener. That would actually be a sickener. Maybe he can give up this acting malarkey and come back and play a bit of ball. I mean, he's probably quite fit in training now. I mean, come on, play in the winter for us, Mescal. Come on. I'll stick you on the Mount Rushmore of Kildare, like if that's a fair trade-off.
I think he'd have to be close there, wouldn't he? I mean, that moment for St Kilda's is right up there in terms of great Kildare sports moments, or a great moment by a Kildare sports person. So I think he has to be in consideration. Like, do we know what sort of centre back he was? Like, I know he was wearing 6 in that photograph of Conor O'Callaghan that's now gone. That's now been circulated so much when they were both captaining their teams at minor level. Was he the sort of forward rampaging centre back? Was he more of a reader of the ball that hung back?
A cross between Henry Downey and Seamus Moynihan. Are they references? You understand the Moynihan reference, but what? So who? Like a cross between?
Or is he like a James McCarthy, basically a third midfielder? I guess it all depends on who the manager was at that time and who was looking after him. Like, were they playing a brand of puke football, for example, in Kildare? Is that the real reason why Paul Mescal chose acting?
Because of the puke football. Well, Kildare don't play puke football. That's the thing. They needed to play a little bit more puke football at times.
Yeah, it would be quite a turnaround if he did actually appear in a Kildare shirt at some point before his youth was up. That would, would he be the most famous, globally famous person to ever play intercounty football if that were to happen?
Intercounty. Can't really see anybody else. Did anybody make it? I mean, is Kevin Moran? Is he the current presiding champion? Sent off in an FA Cup final. First ever player to be sent off in an FA Cup final. The match that's watched around the world. The viewership figures for that would have been sensational. Is he the most famous? Is there anybody else?
Yeah, we've stumbled upon this question now. Like, of course, when you talk about people who picked up random pieces of Gaelic games, like it's someone like Bowden Barrett, the person that comes to mind, or if you want to just suggest that Muhammad Ali held a hurl for that 5 seconds or however long it was. But for actual intercounty player, yeah, I think you're right. It's hard to think of anyone beyond Moran. I'm sure people at home will let us know, but that's a good question. But Paul Mescal, the crown is there for you if you want it.
Jack Grealish's dad always said that his summers spent playing Gaelic football turned him into a much better soccer player. It gave him the ability to ride tackles and also to take the kind of shit that you were going to get if you were Jack Grealish. So, never actually played intercounty, unless he played intercounty at like that level for Warwickshire or whatever part of those shires that does that. English geography is always very confusing. It's like, how can you tell what part of England it is? Let's move on before I expose any more of my ignorance. 14 minutes past 8 here this morning on Wednesday, the 6th of May. Raising a nation's spirits apparently won't be enough to convince Premier League club doctors about a return to play. Who knew? They're seeking answers from the Premier League regarding the safety of their players. Clubs are due to vote on the league's Project Restart early next week. The British government medical specialists are scheduled to brief players and managers on Monday, but club doctors have raised 10 areas of concern surrounding a return to play. We'll get into that a little bit later on. Hopes for a Bundesliga return, though, could get a huge boost today. Chancellor Angela Merkel is to discuss safety protocols with the premiers of each of Germany's regions. Should they reach an agreement, the German Football League will rubber stamp a return tomorrow, and it's hoped the top two divisions can be back on the pitch within a fortnight. Football's coming home. In golf, Padraig Harrington has let slip that Luke Donald is one of his Ryder Cup vice-captains. Harrington is due to lead Europe in defence of the trophy at Whistling Straits in September. Harrington also said that he won't have 12 captains' picks for his team and will actually have between 4 and 5. So they're obviously putting contingency plans in place for the fact that not much golf will be played before then. The three-time major winner feels a behind-closed-door event would be better than no event at all. In tennis, over €5.5 million has been raised so far for tour players most in need. The WTA and ATP tours, along with all 4 Grand Slams and the ITF, have created a player relief fund. Professional tennis has been suspended until mid-July, and the fund will help players whose income has dried up as a result. Here's what's coming up on the show for you this morning before we get into the papers. I'm going to talk the return or potential return of Premier League football. Going to mention horse racing around about 8:50 this morning. Our OTB Culture Hall of Fame is about Gangs of London, and the star of Gangs of London is actually with us this morning. His name is Joe Cole, not the footballer. And then Mount Rushmore today is Louth. Dan McDonnell and Ronan Mullen bringing us a completely controversy-free half hour of investigation into what's going on with the history of Louth football and who you would put on their sporting Mount Rushmore. If you want to get involved, 087 9 180 180 is the number. Time for the papers.
OTB AM.
We start as ever with offtheball.com, and great stories from John Myler's time as the assistant manager to Jurgen Klopp. It was a charity auction that his son David bought for him, and then in the aftermath of winning the Champions League, Myler's there because obviously he's best mates with Jordan Henderson, and his dad is there, and Klopp is asking him, Myler's there, and Klopp is asking him how his dad was, because they'd actually had met at a charity thing, which it just goes to show the humanity of Jurgen Klopp is not fake. It's a real thing. And then some other stuff there. We used to blank each other, Ken Doherty, on Up and Down Friendship with Ronnie O'Sullivan. The Last Dance, watch Key Bulls NBA Finals games in full. So those matches that are being referred to in The Last Dance are now available to watch. And Aaron Rodgers is still an elite quarterback. That's the stories that we have for you on the homepage. And also Paul Rouse's history lesson last night. It's an extraordinary phenomenon, talking about the GAA, and says it's unique in the entire world. Great stuff on the website for you at the moment, for you to spend a bit of time with. Where are we off to next, Owen?
The Irish Independent. Ger leads with Lavery slams HRI over inaction on racing return. Trainer says key stakeholders still in dark as governing body's deafening silence causes chaos. So this is leading trainer Sheila Lavery, who has led into the HRI chiefs for their deafening silence around the return of Irish racing. You've also got Jason Burt writing this morning that Premier League players will face heart/lung tests ahead of restart. So this is going to be part of how the Premier League are going to carry out assessments on their players before their proposed return to play. You've got a photograph there from the Bayern Munich training ground as well. 9 days to go as Germany gets the green light. Rolling rock steady on road to Dublin, scoring immortality, writes Conor McKeown on Dean Rock. There's a piece on Nevin Spence as well, gone but never forgotten. And Dan McDonnell, Waterford decision highlights dangers of waiting game.
The Irish Times this morning, and there it is, daily screening of players, part of return protocols. That is Jerry Thornley's story. World Rugby says masks and gloves at training not deemed essential. IRFU could face loss of revenue exceeding €10 million. And games without supporters could involve 167 people. World Rugby. So again, rugby beginning to grapple with what training might look like, what matches might look like, what in terms of people at the games, and how you would somehow conduct matches in a safe environment. And that's the main stories in the Irish Times sports section this morning.
The Irish Examiner then leads with John Fogarty's piece that the GA chief warns insurance could delay return to action. So he's spoken to a few people from provincial councils, and Munster chairman Liam Lenihan has raised concerns about insurance and how that could be a huge barrier that perhaps people aren't considering at the moment in terms of getting games back up and running. Basketball, meanwhile, is playing it safe with November League restart, and Ida managing the transition from goal machine to trivia king. He's doing pretty well on the Zoom quizzes, Adam Ida, it turns out. And catastrophic outlook for English rugby raises Irish concerns. Right, Simon Lewis, I think you mentioned it there in the Irish Times, a sport that depends so much on a fairly compact part of the calendar when it comes to television rights and people through the turnstiles at Test rugby. It's going to be a make or break 12 to 18 months for the sport in a couple of areas.
The RFU in particular appear to be a bit screwed. Their chief executive said it would lose 15 million in this financial year ending in June, which is guaranteed to happen. If the scheduled autumn internationals went ahead with crowds, it would still lose 32 million. Playing at Twickenham behind closed doors would see losses of 85 million sterling, rising to 107 million if those games were cancelled. That's before the end of the year. So best case scenario is what they're going to lose anyway, which is 15 million. Worst case scenario is over the next 6 months, 107 million. And more than likely, it's probably going to be somewhere in between, which will be about 85 million. Not great, really. You can see how the RFU have put themselves in a sticky situation here, and they weren't the best run organisation up to this point over the last decade or so. There hasn't really been a long-term plan or a sense that this was an organisation that knew exactly what the future would hold for them if things were good. So it's going to be very interesting to see how they respond to things being as bad as they are. In the London Times this morning, doctors will help to calm players' fears. This is Matt Lawton's story here. The Times can reveal another such meeting is scheduled to address safety concerns among players before a planned resumption of training this month, followed by a return to playing competitive matches from the 8th of June. So we're 30 days away from the Premier League returning. The Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, said yesterday the government was looking at sport being played behind closed doors in the second phase. And I think it would lift the spirits of the nation, he said. But obviously we've been hearing how the players themselves are a little bit more concerned about this. And there's going to be a meeting tomorrow between the Cross Sports Working Body, which involves medical experts and officials from football, cricket, rugby and racing to try and get things back, or at least to put the safety protocols in place which would allow a return to play. So I think that mood music has changed a little bit from this is a disaster, it's never going to happen again, to we're just going to do this and see what happens. Now that in itself could actually be a disaster if everything comes back too soon and everything has to close down again. But certainly it looks like we're at the point where they've decided that the risk is I don't know, worth it, or certainly that they're willing to take that risk to see what happens in the UK anyway.
Back page of the Mirror this morning is "We'll sue if trapdoor is shut. Parry warning for Premier League. Ban relegation and it will get very messy." So this is the Football League chairman, Rick Parry, who insists the Premier League would be sued if relegation was scrapped. You've got Super Normal as the headline on the story that TV sensation Mescal on par with David Clifford and Con, says ex-boss. A real loss for Kildare. Golf clubs need to get it right on reopening. That's Gary Murphy's column. Villa may lose stars to virus. This is Dean Smith, who's talking about the possibility that players will opt out from playing when the Premier League returns. Let's give Taylor his P45. The Premier League rubbish Gordon Taylor's claim that matches could last less than 90 minutes when football returns. And Six Nations in telly sell-off. Some Six Nations games will be sold to pay TV to cover financial losses from the COVID-19 shutdown. That's according to the RFU chief executive, Bill Sweeney.
So am I doing the Mail next? Is that what did you just do the Mirror there? Yeah, so
that is the Mirror.
2 billion black hole. Top 3 sports face catastrophic losses if season is total write-off. That's in the UK. And Collie Pope takes the lead. It's one of the cricketers out training with his dog. A new bloke project restart at clubs delay training. So there's a mix there really of different angles from the different papers this morning. Some explaining that this is likely to happen, and then others saying that there's no chance of this happening because the players don't actually want it to happen just yet. And then ready to play is the picture of David Clifford on the back of the Irish Mail. Clifford backs games behind closed doors. I think if it's safe to play, if we've reached a point where that's been established, that there's some kind of herd immunity has been established, I mean, we would need hundreds of thousands of people to be tested to reach that point where people are suggesting we've got there. Is that possible by November? Is it? I don't know. I mean, a lot can happen between, what are we at, the 6th of May, between now and November. A lot can happen, right? For us to have inter-county games in a 2020 championship season that starts in November and finishes in February.
Like it'll probably still come down to attitude, will it? It'll still be a situation of actually wondering if the supposed risk is actually small enough, and that, as you mentioned, that the herd immunity will have built up enough. Like, what is enough of a herd immunity? How many people need to get infected? Like, you can look at it a number of different ways, and a number of governments are looking at it in different ways. Some are being far more cautious than others. I wonder, is it going to be a situation that the mood music here has suggested caution, and that has been how this country has proceeded over the last couple of months. So if there is a tight rope decision or something with a fairly thin division between yes, let's go for it or let's not, you suspect that things actually might rest on the no, let's not go for it. But then again, you do have the whole economic impact of everything going down the toilet, which is already happening, obviously.
What's next?
Next for me is the Irish Daily Star. Balls in your court. Champ clubs threaten legal action if promotion is binned. TV star was no normal player. Connacht Council President Jerry McGovern has issued a warning. He has doubled down on his no-nonsense comment on COVID-19. He insists the GAA won't die for a game of football, but could cause death by playing one, and return to play could harm. Owen here, he fears there could be consequences if League of Ireland football makes an early return to action.
So it was the former Kildare minor boss Brendan Hackett who says that he could have been as good as Glenn Ryan. He won a Leinster minor in 2013, captained them to the final in 2014 under Hackett, and then lined out in provincial under-21 finals in 2015 and 2016. This is a golden generation of Kildare football, and he's obviously, according to the hype now, the best of the lot. There is no question in my mind that he could have been a current county footballer, absolutely no question about it. He had the ability and the personality to be very successful as a county footballer. His real desire was to get into the Lear Academy, and that's a really competitive course with a lot of people applying for it. I believe it's as much about the interview process going for that as the points you have, and they were clearly taken by him. A confidence coupled with a humility, and the other thing I would say is that I always felt there was a strong ambition in him. So, you know, that's exactly what we needed.
I think he emigrated for a while as well, didn't he? He after getting into the Lear Academy, I think he spent a year in Amsterdam.
You've obviously been doing some reading. Yeah, anything else? Any other little tidbits of Paul Mescal stalking that you've done over the last couple of weeks?
No, I'm just saying that you don't even need to be a world famous actor to actually leave Kildare football. Like literally anything is better is what I'm trying to say.
A broken jaw while on GAA duty convinced Mescal to quit the sport, though he since made a dramatic, albeit brief, return on our TV screens. There you go. So it was the broken jaw, I think, more than any of your bullshit on that was actually at the root of that. But you know, that's what research gets you. Facts. What's next?
You're going to the Sun next, sure.
The Sun next is here we go. Oh yeah. All right, I get you now. Premier League chiefs waiting on Merkel. Okay, this is all eyes on Angela. And that's a picture of Bayern Munich's Thomas Müller in training with Manuel Neuer. So, as I said, they should be filming those training games. We'd all be watching. Lanzini, it's madness. West Ham star Manuel Lanzini says it will be madness for the Premier League to return before there was a vaccine against COVID-19. There might not be a vaccine, Manuel. That's the thing. There might never be a vaccine. So they need to come up with some alternative plans so that you can play football and continue to get paid for playing football in EFL 3 up or it's court. So. That's lower tier football not having any of this. No. The last season didn't happen. Liverpool can be champions, but the Premier League teams are going to stay in the Premier League, and we'll start that season all again. And the EFL are saying no to that. Would they not just expand the Premier League for one season and have 6 relegated the next year? Wouldn't that be mad and brilliant?
I'd say it's probably an option that has to be on the table at this point. Definitely, or at least a 22-team Premier League season, make up a couple of the games next year. Definitely would be an option if they don't get the season played off, I would have thought. The Guardian this morning, the shape of things to come, they ask, no close talk, spitting or nose blowing as South Korea's K-League gets set for Friday, kick off the baseball already underway in Korea. Parachute payments are evil, Parry called for wage cap as he issues Premier League warning. And cricket faces £380 million loss if season is void, says ECB chief.
The Herald this morning is... Dunn drew on entire reserve of very being. So this is they're continuing Dublin's greatest sporting occasions. Number 3 on Eamon Carr's list is Dunn versus Cordoba in 2009. So this is the weekend that Liverpool beat Man United and Ireland did the Grand Slam, and Bernard Dunn was crowned world champion, world WBA super bantamweight, and this was at the O2. I think it was the last fight at the Point. Was it not the Point? They're saying it was the O2, but I actually think, well, maybe I'm wrong with that, but maybe Poontzwat was the last one. It was an orgy of violence that captivated the nation. After 32 minutes and 57 seconds of furious toe-to-toe action, Bernard Dunn was hailed the new WBA super bantamweight champion of the world. This is a fight that you should go back and watch if you haven't seen it, because Dunn has to climb up from the canvas twice before coming back to win it, and was an absolute wreck afterwards. Like, left absolutely everything out there to become world champion in front of a home crowd. And when you think about how far we are away now from being able to enjoy nights like that for the entire sport, like it feels like it's kind of from a completely different era, and it's 11 years ago. But like, what a sensational fight! Like, Bernard Dunn was one of those fighters that was marked for superstardom from very early on, and this was him finally fulfilling his potential on an amazing sporting weekend. Like, Ronan O'Gara had just had the manky old spiral that drop-kicked Ireland to Grand Slam for the first time in 6 decades. And then that evening, it's like, yeah, I'm going to go and win a world title. A sensational thing to happen, and I can see why Eamon Carr puts it number 3 on his list.
The Irish news this morning is where I'm finishing up. Harrington not giving up on Ryder Cup. Your captain, Patrick Harrington, is hoping the Ryder Cup can take one for the world of team sport and go ahead this year. So obviously set to go ahead in Wisconsin between the 25th and 27th of September. And SPFL chief tells government that financial support is crucial. The Scottish government was warned the future of soccer in the country is under threat during talks which confirmed a return to sporting action remains some distance away.
The Telegraph, £740 million black hole, and they've helpfully worked out exactly how much money is going to be lost by each of the individual sports. The EFL, this is not including the Premier League, by the way, so the EFL is 200 million, the ECB is 380 million, UK sport, which is they're essentially saying athletics and Olympic sports, 53 million, and rugby 107 million, and that's between now and the end of the year. And then they also have the story about clubs testing players for respiratory and cardiac flaws before training, so making sure that if Premier League football does return, that the players will have access to the best medical care in the world, which you would expect, given that they're very important assets to the clubs and all the money being spent. I guess the key thing here is the British government are saying it will lift the spirits of the nation to have football played. Will it? Like that, let's just not assume that is a truism anymore, that watching football behind closed doors might end up being something that people don't want to watch.
The television companies will do everything to ensure that it is, and whether that's editing in audio or putting in something that makes it sound like a proper atmosphere. Like, I'm not sure that you see that story over the course of the weekend where they might have access to players to players on the sideline and management mid-match and at halftime, kind of like BT would have in the rugby and how TG Carr would have in the rugby. So there's going to be different innovations here and there to make it a better television product. And the Premier League are in a position, and the broadcasters are in a position to demand more from the Premier League at this point, given the product isn't going to be the same. Without an atmosphere there, it just can't be. It's different. Everything kind of feels different. And like you can't imagine a big, hefty challenge going in without the roar of the crowd or without the outrage from the home support where a referee to get a decision wrong. But maybe there could just be somebody with a set of hotkeys in the box actually getting creative with it and saying, it looks like we've got a player here who's gone in over the ball that deserves a big crowd noise, and he presses the button that says big crowd noise.
Yeah.
I would love that job. Anybody, if anybody is hiring for the person who presses the button and deciding what crowd noises will go up, you know where I'm at.
You're available for a small fee. Tell me, what do you think about fake crowd noises?
Well, I think it's a bit ridiculous, to be honest. Like, it would resemble something like, not even like FIFA. I think FIFA kind of has it down to, it's got it much better, but something like Football Manager, where it kind of just feels like a wave of audio coming up and down. Like, how do you replicate this? Like, how do you actually nail fake crowd noises?
I'd say they've probably been someone somewhere has been doing it for a long time. You know, they must have. Like, there must be a template for this, and certainly, do you remember the Atlanta Falcons were pumping in fake crowd noise to make the place more intimidating, and ended up losing a draft pick because of it. It happened like 5 or 6 years ago. So somebody somewhere knows how to do it. Like, sound engineers are geniuses at this stage.
Yeah.
If we you know,
who came up with canned laughter in the first place? Can the canned laughter geniuses come in? Actually, football with canned laughter could be the way forward.
No, that is a genuinely good idea. But like, if they do it, there's going to be a backlash against it the first day, right? Everybody will be like, "Ah, look at this abomination of you faking this thing," and it's like, there will immediately be a backlash if they did it. But maybe it's the right thing to do.
And it's the opportunity to do so, because we know that there's going to be a backlash regardless. There are people who will be vehemently against this and people who are so for it. Everything's just starting to get so divisive at this point. So when you're in a position of facing a backlash anyway, you may as well make it worth your while and try something new out.
So that is your roundabout way of saying, yes, give me fake crowd noises. I want to see it.
Yeah, let's do it. Come on. Like, I mean, the thing we're forgetting here is that, like, there are so many games that we played in the Premier League, and only a fraction of them will actually matter. We are now going to enter a place where the Premier League, everything is going to be available to us, where we've gone from a place where it hasn't been, and yet even the ones that have been selected for television come the end of the season are often pointless. So yeah, let's try it out. Let's watch for the production and for what the television can bring us. Like, because Liverpool are going to win the title within a week or two of the games returning. That's probably going to be within 3 days of each other. The relegation battle will heat up nicely, and other than that, like, what is there really except for a few European places? So I will be watching to see what the Premier League does for it. There will be a curiosity to it.
Okay, the other thing is that there's a debate yet. So Gavin Cummins got a number about what World Rugby are going to let in. It seems a bit smaller than what the Premier League have been talking about. Something what the German Football Federation have been talking about in terms of the amount of players, people you need to be able to get to a game, because perhaps they were including media. If there are commentators in the ground and the ground is empty, the players are going to hear what the commentator is saying, essentially. Especially if you're like Jonathan Pearce or Nathan.
The Liverpool players, when they win the Premier League title, the first thing they will hear is Nathan Murphy's monologue when they win, which is actually a remarkable moment for Nathan. Like, I mean, our commentators definitely going to be let in. I presume they are.
I'm not sure. I mean, they might be forced to do it off tube. If people are unfamiliar with off tube, they sit in a room.
What's that, Ger?
It's what it's what a lot of the Rugby World Cup, say, for example, a lot of the commentators weren't actually at the matches that you would have seen. You would have seen this in a lot of different places where people sit in a room, the crowd noise gets pumped into their live, the actual real crowd noise gets pumped into their ears, and they watch TV and they broadcast, they commentate and analyse off the TV. I expect that will happen for the Premier League in a way that makes a whole heap of sense, right? But what if there's like one commentator who's allowed in and that's the world feed and everybody has to take that? So Jonathan Pearce is there screaming, absolutely screaming at matches, and like Jurgen Klopp is looking up and going,
just put him behind some sort of soundproof glass, which can also double as a coronavirus container, where you can't transmit anything and you can't actually transmit any sound either to people within the stadium. It's a win-win. Like 167, I think, is the number placed on the rugby story, isn't it, of people that will need to be in a stadium to get things underway and to get an event done. So that'd be the teams and the squads and the broadcasters and the staff. That seems relatively achievable in the size of a stadium. Can you socially distance with 167 people? Well, obviously not, because the players are going to have to play a full contact match. So maybe it doesn't actually matter all that much in terms of the rest of the players. But that's the number that's been put on us this morning. But like so many great television opportunities Just that, like, if it comes, like, we'll have to see what Germany do next week. Like, they could potentially get the ball rolling in terms of innovation in football that we'll see this summer.
Maybe they'll allow a certain amount of socially distanced fans into the actual matches to create some noise through loud hailers or something. I don't know, but like it is interesting what the staging of these games is actually going to look like, and what we want from them as well. So here we are, 8:39 this morning on OTB AM. If you've just joined us, you missed some good stuff. We had a replay of Paul Rouse's stuff from last night. You can get that on our podcast network, the OTB podcast network. Subscribe to highlights on OTB, and you'll get that and all the rest of the best stuff that we do as well. Now, no live sport, no problem. Virgin Media Sport are airing over 10 hours of classic games each weekend to celebrate some of the great moments in sport. David Myler joined Joe on last night's Off the Ball to chat through Liverpool's 2019 Champions League winning campaign. Have a look.
So the semi-final is the 4-0 at Anfield. It's Origi, it's Trent Alexander-Arnold's corner. It's just the most insane game. Are you at that? Are you in Anfield for that game?
Do you know, I spoke to JP a while ago. I turned to my wife and said, I've got something on later on, and she says, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, we're talking about Liverpool and the Champions League last year." And she says, "Oh." The morning of the game, I woke up and
this is not going to be good.
Yeah. Jordan had rang me and says, "I have a ticket for you, whatever. Like, I'm close with his wife or whatever." So like, he says, "You'll be up with the wife and that." And I was like, "Grand, whatever, blah, blah, blah." And the time just kept cricking by, and I was like thinking, they're not going to do it. I was like, oh, and then my wife had me doing a few things, and I just said, "Do you know what? I'll just leave it." And I stayed at home and watched at home. I can't believe it. Like, and just, do you know, it was just, yeah. Like, I was jumping around the front room, but I was just thinking the whole time, like, I should be there.
Yeah.
I had no reason not to be there. Like, I had the all clear from the wife. Do you know what I mean? She had everything on lockdown here in the house. And I just said, I have to score 4 goals. It's going to be hard work, you know. I think it was Firmino and Salah were missing. I was like, it's not going to happen. And look, it's one of those I don't talk about much because I'm gutted I missed it.
I mean, it's only one of it's like in the top 5 greatest Liverpool games of all time, guaranteed forevermore. But listen, I'm sure it was nice to sit on the couch as well.
I probably go as far as it's in the top greatest Champions League comebacks of all time.
I wanted to say number 1, but I feel like it's sacrilege to say that. I mean, it's got to be close to 1 for Liverpool.
It's certainly up there. Of course, Liverpool fans will say 05 is probably bigger because it's the final. But there's always that big debate, what's bigger, 99 or 05? And then people say, like, Liverpool, you know, Man U scored 2 goals in whatever it was, 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes. But, like, you know, Bayern Munich scored after, 10, 11 minutes. So, like, they had the whole, you know what I mean, they had 79 minutes to equalise. And then you look at, like, Liverpool were 3-0 down at half-time, so they had 45 minutes. I know they won on penalties. But it's like, Liverpool fans will pick them, Man U fans will pick it's there's no point. I've one friend who's a diehard Liverpool fan, the majority of Man U fans, so it's just an endless argument.
Good one, though. The lads enjoying that last night. He obviously goes on to talk about the final and has a great story about his dad and Jurgen Klopp as well. So worth digging that out on the football show from last night. OTB Football is the podcast that you need to subscribe to get that good stuff. Or, of course, you can get it on our YouTube channel. Hit subscribe on that and you'll get all our good stuff. We break everything down into a nice little handy playlist for you, so you can just let it roll from one good stuff to the other. I watched the first episode of the 2 that dropped last night from Last Dance. And you guys have obviously been doing a brilliant podcast during the week in the immediate aftermath of it. The first one up, so Jarlath Regan, yourself, Ronan Mullen and Kieran Donaghy going back and looking at the 2 episodes and then broadcasting immediately afterwards. Michael Jordan was in my dreams last night.
Oh, yeah? What did he do?
We were mates and we were on a bus together. So it was kind of this weird mishmash of the season and a half playing baseball and The Last Dance. I've no idea. I mean, I don't think I took full advantage of the opportunities. Like, you know, it's Michael Jordan at the peak of his fame and we're like riding some public transport bus. Like, could we not have been doing something a little bit more fun, you know, like a Vegas trip or,
He was just playing it cool. So he was a baseballer at this point.
Even a card game. Like, I wouldn't mind seeing the stakes that are involved when he's stealing Magic's money. Not stealing, but browbeating Magic into giving him his money. So the episode I've seen was the Dream Team and brushing over the Isaiah Thomas issue, or helpfully massaging the Isaiah Thomas issue into making it not be a Michael Jordan issue, but an everybody on the Dream Team issue with Isaiah Thomas. You know, it's probably credible enough that everybody hated him considering he was so successful at the time. But are there other winners and losers from this that we need to talk about?
Yeah, we can go through them. There's a piece up on offtheball.com at the moment. Like, for me, like, as we went through yesterday morning, I think Michael Jordan's a loser from this episode. I think the politics question is kind of fudged from a documentary making standpoint. And I think he's a loser as well in terms of what you mentioned there, the Dream Team situation, that he just does not have his story straight on Isaiah Thomas, that he completely denied that it was just him. Or he denied that it was really him at all that was the contributing factor to Isaiah Thomas not getting on that plane to Barcelona in 1992. Like, you had Michael Wilbon of ESPN saying that nobody in the team wanted to play with Isaiah Thomas. And what you actually had was Wilbon going on Twitter after the documentary was aired to say, sorry about that, Isaiah Thomas. I actually didn't really mean to say that, because there may have been one or two mistruths in what I said. And if you actually go back and read Jack McCallum's Dream Team book, like, Jordan is on the record in 2011 as saying, I don't want Michael Jordan, or I don't want Isaiah Thomas on the team. So he said to Jack McCallum in 2011, I told Rod, I don't want to play if Isaiah Thomas is on the team. So that's at odds with what he said in the documentary here. And for that reason, he's a loser. Like, it's his documentary, of course, so he can do whatever he wants. He can say whatever he wants, but it's not consistent with what he said before.
It's not consistent with what Jordan has said before, so it feels like he's trying to correct the McCallum narrative, fix the McCallum narrative, and build a new one, which is that this was a collective decision somehow.
Exactly. That's what it certainly seems to me. Like, the McCallum's account or previous accounts aren't really mentioned in the documentary. It kind of comes across as, finally, I'm going to speak out about what happened in 1992. Whereas, like, that's not the case at all. Like, you've spoken about this thing before. You said that you told the team manager that you didn't want to play with Isaiah Thomas in the past. And, like, obviously people might actually be coming to this thinking this is the only account on it. And I don't know. I found it kind of comical that Isaiah Thomas gets literally one sentence in these two episodes to kind of hit back at that. Like, I guess he doesn't really know for sure. He wasn't exactly told, and maybe people will say they were going to win gold anyway, and team chemistry was as important as anything. And you know what? I actually buy that. I think that's fair enough. But Jordan should be coming out saying, "Yeah, I played my part in furthering that narrative."
Yeah, the other way they could have done it was get everybody to stack up what he said. So they had access to everybody else who apparently had issues with Isaiah Thomas. In the documentary, Michael said you didn't want to play with Isaiah and that actually you were as much responsible for it as he was. Is this true? No, I got on really well with Isaiah. Yeah, we had that one flashpoint where we went friends immediately afterwards. Or, yeah, no, I didn't really hated him. Thought it would have been a disaster for us. Like, I also, like, it's funny how that overshadows the Dream Team, which is this amazing moment in basketball. Like, so that wrong was done, but it's not Saipan style where the best player doesn't play. Like, Michael Jordan, clearly the best player. So this is going to happen along the way. Players are going to be, rivalries will happen. I mean, is this Wayne Bridge? No, this is somebody much better than Wayne Bridge not being able to play because of a scenario that happened. And it did feel like he was kind of bitter about the whole experience a little bit because he had to talk about Isaiah Thomas, even though, as everybody else is making the case in the documentary, that the Dream Team is the thing that catapults the NBA from an American thing to a global phenomenon, and maybe that was going to happen with TV anyway. Like, maybe the marketing of Nike was going to turn the NBA into something much bigger than the NBA was. But certainly this is an accelerant, a pour in the fire of Michael Jordan's career, because it's free to air TV in every country in the world, and everybody gets to watch the Dream Team playing basketball at a time when you couldn't really watch American basketball in this part of the world, except like late at night in highlight for him, and that was definitely a huge benefit for, I presume, for Nike as well, even though Reebok are the ones who are the sponsors of the US Olympic team. Just very briefly on the point about the Republicans wear sneakers too. There was an opportunity when they were making this documentary to make the whole thing be about that and be about who Jordan is and to justify him not being an activist. You had to show that stuff in the first episode at the very start. This needed to be something that was, if this was going to be a documentary series that is on the same epic scale of the OJ story, which is a tapestry of history, this is just the story of Michael Jordan, the basketballer, and him settling scores along the way. It's beautifully told, it's great to watch, but these are not works that are parallel in terms of their achievement and leading to a deeper understanding of the world that we live in. This is Michael Jordan's world and how he lives. And look, it's absolutely fascinating, but I think we need to stop talking and comparing these two documentary series. Like,
I don't think it's anybody, like, I haven't read too many reviews comparing the two of them, like on an actual critical level as two pieces of art. Like, I'm not sure. Like, I could have totally missed it in fairness. Every week I'm not Googling OJ and I'm not Googling Michael Jordan together, you know?
I think, but like everybody at the start was like, ooh, this is going to be similar to, that's how it was framed. Like, they're doing to Michael Jordan what they did to OJ, and they're not. Like, I would happily watch a Tiger Woods 10-part series, but I won't be thinking that I'm going to come to a deeper understanding of American race relations and history on that. It'll be a mirror of this, I think. And there are probably a couple of other athletes who you'll be interested in. I think somebody made the point, Chuck Klosterman was like, I'd definitely watch Kaepernick. I would definitely watch 10 episodes on Kaepernick and where that goes and how that finishes. But I don't think that story's told just yet. So
that's a really good point, actually, that the Kaepernick you would, and like obviously the greatest sports documentary of all time, When We Were Kings. It's been done on Muhammad Ali, but you would love to see a modern 2020 10-part version of the Ali story as well, given that there are, it has all been told multiple times with some of the best sports writing, best sports documentaries ever. But still, this sort of long-form treatment, which is now on vogue, I think that there's an opportunity there to revisit some of the older characters as well. But like, there's definitely some of this that it's like Jordan didn't do enough for him to justify this sort of treatment that OJ got and that story got, which really told us a lot about the world. But then again, I definitely felt that they left a lot out there, that there is more they could have done with the footage that they had, and with the potential people that they could have interviewed and declined to interview, or the stories that they declined to tell or declined to get into. And that is because Jordan owns this documentary. Like, I mean, clearly OJ was no part of OJ Made in America, and that was hugely important.
Yeah, they were free to do what they wanted. 8:52 this morning here on OTB AM. Jim Beglin joined Joe on Sunday for a chat about his life in football. It led to a brilliant story about the influence that John Giles had on Beglin's career. Have a look.
Younger listeners might be hearing John Giles, Eamon Dunphy, Shamrock Rovers, and not quite sure what's going on here. So we're talking kind of 1980. You go to Liverpool in 83, but John Giles and Eamon Dunphy with them had gone back to Rovers, and we're really saying, well, there are possibilities here for Irish football, and we could turn Rovers into something, and we'll play football the right way. And it was, what a brilliant idea, and maybe we'll get there sooner rather than later with League of Ireland clubs. Can you give us a sense of how Giles and Dunphy operated then, what a training session was like, the type of football I can imagine that they wanted you to play? Give us a sense of that time and what they were trying to do.
Yeah, well, when I ended up signing for Shamrock Rovers, I don't remember Eamon being about much. It was really down to John Giles in the main. And, well, the way he liked to play the game. He loved a passing game. But not just for the sake of getting on the ball and just looking all kind of nice and stylish, and not it wasn't that. It was with real purpose, with real ambition. He wanted us to be as good as we possibly could, and the whole philosophy back then was to try and hold some of the Irish talent in Ireland, to bring it to Shamrock Rovers then. And it was a professional setup by the time I joined it. And for them to be able to try and compete on the European stage. And obviously, the Irish players, if they brought the talent through strongly enough, then, they could make money by selling it on to English clubs. But it didn't quite work out. We had a very good team: Alan Campbell, Liam Buckley, Jacko McDonough, Alan O'Neill, Robbie Gaffney. But we get so far, we get nearly there all the time. We were like a nearly team. We played the football, but we didn't have the nous to be able to secure the results on the League of Ireland stage. And, I think we finished second, maybe third, fourth, a couple of times, at least while I was there. As soon as I left, of course, it all took off, and they started winning doubles every year. But, but we then began to realise that it wasn't working out, and that they were going to go back to part-time football. So obviously then that required us to get jobs, and Shamrock Rovers were helping in that process at the time. And I had a shout to go to Arsenal. I thought I was going to Arsenal, but that fell through, and I began a commercial course with Aer Lingus, not to work with Aer Lingus, but to do a commercial course on site there. And I was a week into that, in the process of maybe securing work and playing football part-time, when Liverpool came in. And I knew then that, this is a big moment. But Shamrock Rovers, I will always thank, and John Giles, because, and I've said this before, he changed me from a naive country kid, a culshie, into a much more switched on pro, a hardened version of a professional footballer, and what was needed to then take it on from there. He gave me great confidence and belief that I could go all the way.
A bit like Connell, it sounds like there, Owen, to be honest.
That's it. It's all about instilling confidence. It's
pretty amazing though, like the importance of Giles in Irish football history kind of resonates down through the generations, from those of us just watching them on TV and being educated, to those who are listening today to being educated, and genuine love from Jim Beglin there for one of the most important characters in the history of Irish football. 087 918 180 is the number if you want to WhatsApp us this morning. What are we at now? 8:56 here, and OTB AM has been with you since 7:30 this morning, as we are every morning all the way through until 10 o'clock. In the next hour, we're bringing you the Louth Mount Rushmore. Very straightforward, it looks like. And then we're going to get into the very latest episode of the OTB Culture Hall of Fame. Very excited to say that Joe Cole, lead actor in Gangs of London, is going to join us next. But if you've missed anything from the show, or indeed anything from the last few days, check it out on the OTB Podcast Network. Our History of Sports series with Paul Rouse, the latest episode of Off the Bull with Kieran Donaghy, Jarlath Regan, our Jim Beglin Legends interview, our Saturday snooker panel with Ken Doherty and Dennis Taylor, and the very latest episode of Off the Brawl with Andy Lee. All that content is free, and it's been free for the last... we've created that all just in the last few days. It has been free forever, obviously. You'll find that and much more. You can subscribe to the OTB AM podcast stream wherever you get your podcast, and we timestamp every 2.5 hour show so that you can scroll through to whatever you want. We're back with Joe Cole, the star of Gangs of London, next.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio. The Saturday panel on Off the Ball.
There's a growing hostility towards cyclists. We're somehow seen as a nuisance, when in fact we're just people trying to get to work.
I've never ever gotten one bad word said to me about my sexuality, or from the opposition, or from, actually in one match I was nearly, the girl was marking me so tightly, I was like, I have a girlfriend.
I'm not the person I was 10 years ago, and that doesn't worry me. I know I can play good enough golf.
Don't miss the panel every Saturday afternoon, only on Off the Ball. OTB AM. The OTB Culture Hall of Fame.
Brought to you by Now TV. Watch whatever you're in the mood for.
Right, it's time for this week's OTB Culture Hall of Fame in association with Now TV, where you can stream award-winning dramas such as Game of Thrones and Parks and Recreation, Curb Your Enthusiasm, and now, of course, Gangs of London, which is a show that I've been raving about for a bunch of weeks here, Owen, and I have a feeling we might end up doing player ratings on Gangs of London as well, because it is that good. Sorry, a lot of people have been wondering, is it as good as I've been making it? I would say yes.
You have been making a lot of Gangs of London, for sure. You've definitely been the biggest hype man for Gangs of London, to the point where I actually started it. I was a sheep in all of this. I haven't regretted it, that's for sure. It's the least boring show you're ever likely to watch. I'll put it that way. People will have divisive opinions on violence, and I'm okay with that. But if you're a fan of violence and see it as an art form, which I certainly do when it comes to a lot of filmmaking, then you'll enjoy Gangs of London.
It's elevated to a higher art form in this. Like it is super violent, and so certainly the first couple of episodes, my wife was like, "There's a lot of violence in this. Is it going to ease off at any point?" But we stuck with it, and I'm really glad we did, because there were definitely like scenes that were like, "Wow." Have you got to the? I don't want to spoil anything. Have there been eyeballs yet?
No. Well, thanks for that spoiler. I now know what part of the body is no longer sacred in Gangs of London. You almost have to rack your brain for all the different things that happened. But no, I would have remembered that. I'm only 6 episodes in.
I know, you probably have seen it then. I might have, it was early on. Anyway, this will be a piece with no spoilers. We're absolutely delighted and thrilled to have Joe Cole, who is the star of the show. He plays Sean Wallace, who's the central figure in Gangs of London. He is the son of Colin Meaney in it. And without giving too much away, we're going to play you this trailer. On the far side of that, we're going to talk with Sean Wallace, aka Joe Cole is the actor who plays Sean Wallace. So we'll let the trailer do the rest of the talking. No spoilers.
We're born into a certain world. It's chosen for us. Some might think it's brutal.
No, please don't kill me!
I say it's glorious.
Someone chose to kill Finn Wallace. Today we mourn the loss of a great man, but tomorrow it will be business as usual.
No.
Everything stops until I find out who killed him.
Right, welcome to this week's edition of the OTB Culture Hall of Fame, sponsored by Now TV, where you can stream award-winning dramas like Game of Thrones and Parks and Recreation, Curb Your Enthusiasm, and now, of course, Gangs of London. And I'm delighted to say we've got Joe Cole with us, who is, of course, starring as Sean Wallace in Gangs of London. Joe, how the hell are you getting on?
I'm good, man. Yeah, I'm all right. I'm trying to keep busy, trying to keep some semblance of routine. But no, I'm doing all right, man. How about yourself?
Well, I'm good, but I can imagine this is like a very weird situation for you to be in right now, because you know normally you would be doing interviews in a posh suite in a nice hotel in London somewhere, talking about this brand new series and getting out and doing all the publicity, and instead you're stuck at home. On the other side of it, everybody else is stuck at home, and this is a good opportunity for a new TV show to be coming out that has captured everybody's attention. So it's not ideal, but at the same time, there's a captive audience there.
Yeah. It's, I mean, in some ways it is very good timing for us, because I guess there's so many people at home watching television, obviously because of the lockdown. It's just crazy. So yeah, hopefully we'll get a few more viewers.
What is it like doing publicity around something when you actually can't get out and tell everybody how great it is?
I mean, you know, you see the reaction online, you know, you see some of the interviews and some of the social media reactions, so you get a sense of what people like and what people don't like. And, you know, it's just, it's all right, man. I'm all right with it, you know. It's I don't have to sort of traipse around London going to, you know, loads of different places. I can just do it all from my bedroom. So it's okay, man. I'm all right with it.
I think it's been said about the Michael Jordan documentary recently, Joe, that it's been gauged on 2 different fronts, not just the viewing figures, but also how many days is it trending for on Twitter. And as a social media success, it's been unbelievable. I presume people involved with Gangs of London think about it in the very same way. Are people talking about it on social media is just as important as how many eyeballs do we have on the TV show?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we don't have the kind of water cooler office chats and you know, that people have very little interaction with one another at the moment, and obviously it's all done through computers. So it is just a different way of kind of getting the message spread. Because I think Gangs of London is very much a show that you know, something that it's a word of mouth kind of thing, and it much the same as Peaky was. Peaky was pure word of mouth. They didn't really have any press on it, and obviously with gangs, we're not really able to do any advertisement. You know, I think they wanted to do big sort of advertisements across the London Underground and buses and stuff all over the country, and they can't do any of that. So it's purely word of mouth and purely social media, really.
It seems to be going quite well. Are you nervous about this stuff when it comes out, or your work is already done, so you can't influence it too much from this point forward? Have you kind of learned to disassociate your feelings of success or failure with how well it's perceived, or as an actor and an artist, you kind of have to be aware of what people are actually saying about the work that you've produced?
A bit of both. I don't get offended, and I don't get too attached to it. I actually remember. I remember hearing this thing that Tom Cruise said, you know, I don't subscribe to everything he kind of shouts, but this I really listen to, and he sort of said if he gets a positive review, or a negative review, it doesn't sway him either way. A positive review doesn't give him particularly much joy. A negative view doesn't give him much pain, because he watches his own performance. He has his own analysis of the film. He has his own sort of interpretation of it, and that's that. And I guess for me, I'm the same. You know, I watch something, I have my own things I like about it. I'm extremely critical and analytical as well. But also, you know, you generally pick up some stuff. You're never going to please everyone. You know, it's a very divisive show and quite a divisive performance, if I'm honest. And that was what the guys at Sky and what Gareth Evans wanted. So you're never going to please anyone, but you do listen, and you kind of. But also, I just critique my own performance, and I have to watch my own stuff so that I can learn and improve and do different things the next time. You know.
How much of that self-analysis do you do on something like this? So we had Louise Harland on last week, who's in Derry Girls, and she was saying that she was in a movie with Woody Harrelson, and she looks back on it now and like internally cringes a little bit because of all the things that she's learned and how much better she feels she is now. I'm sure the rest of us wouldn't notice any of the difference, but from your own perspective, how much video analysis do you do? Are you like a Premier League footballer or a rugby player looking back and going, why did I do that? I should have done this.
I actually, I am actually. I think for me, I don't really understand actors who don't watch themselves. I could only watch it once or twice. But sort of like the first time to get through it, the second time to actually maybe enjoy it a bit more. But yeah, you learn a lot, and then you also kind of gotta just forget about it really, and actually I subscribe to the belief that if sort of 80-20, you know, if I'm 80% happy, then I'll take the 20 that, you know, I'll let that go. You know?
Especially, I'd imagine when you look at something like Gangs of London, where there was just such a body of analysis for you to get stuck into. It's not like you're flitting around the edges here. You are very much the main character. If you want to be self-critical, you've got a lot of opportunities of scenes to work with here.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's funny because it's like people immediately see a gang show and they want, you know, a Tony Soprano or a Tommy Shelby, right? And this character's not that. And you know, and on the page, he's not that, and he learns, and he kind of learns and grows as the show goes on. But he's cut from a very different cloth, and essentially Sean. What I found most interesting about Sean is he's a fish out of water in all walks of life. You know, he's probably too emotional and too messed up to be, at least in the early stages, be this completely ruthless, cutthroat individual. I mean, he does do some very shocking things, but he's also quite emotional with it. You know, he's been sent to the kind of the most expensive private school in the country, so he was a fish out of water there because he's from this very troubled gangster family. And for me, he's just he doesn't fit into any kind of category, and I almost feel kind of sorry for him because he's essentially a bit of a loser in some ways, and that's what I kind of found kind of interesting, particularly in the episode 4 flashback with Colin Meaney. You get a sort of a sense of this this guy's trying to live up to his dad, and he's trying to be this person, but he's been sent to this very expensive school, and he's just trying to prove himself, and he doesn't really know what to do, and he's kind of his building blocks, which is his kind of childhood, is non-existent, and it's crumbling away, and I think only by the end of this season there's a kind of almost an enlightenment to Sean, and a kind of comfortability that he starts to get, and a kind of almost a Buddhist kind of feeling where he actually sort of grows into himself. So it almost takes a whole season to do that. So yeah.
How do you inhabit that character when you read this for the first time? Like, how do you get into that sense of what the relationship is like with Colin Meaney? How do you become him without also losing yourself and having that ability to kind of see the fact that he's growing and has this growth to happen?
I mean, you react from the other performances. You kind of listen, and the way Colin plays it, you react to it. But also, it's just in the script, isn't it? It's kind of like the way it's written. Those flashback scenes, for example, Sean is just awkward, and he's just trying to fit in, and he can't really.
There's also the challenge here, which kind of looms overhead for Sean throughout the entire season, is that he's a grieving son as much as anything else. He's not only somebody looking to take over an empire, there is also the very real aspect of grief in his life from an unexpected death of a character he so wanted to please and to impress throughout his entire life. And I guess that has to be factored in when you look at the transformation of Sean throughout the 9 episodes.
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot going on. He's incredibly emotional, incredibly volatile, doesn't trust anybody, doesn't like any of them. And when we meet him, his dad's literally been killed sort of, 2 or 3 days previous. So, and it's his first time with him seeing all these people that he despises. So, yeah, it's quite interesting. And then as the show goes on, that he uncovers a lot about his family and his father and his history that makes him question things even further and almost spins his view. So it's quite interesting, But initially, yeah, it's just this pure kind of guttural grief of losing his dad.
Was there a model? Is there like the father-son relationship, or even that kind of who those characters are? Did you model those on anybody in particular?
Well, I said in one interview, Barry and Eddie Hearn, Eddie Hearn, the boxing promoter, sort of gained traction and went off the rails. But I guess in some ways, I did a lot of research on gangsters and gangster families, and essentially all these people who grow up to be kind of career criminals have usually a masculine sort of figure in their life who is their main role model, whether it be their dad, their stepdads, an uncle, a friend of the family. They have a very clear role model who is a masculine alpha male with nice watches and nice cars and cash in the back pocket. Yeah, I liken it to them in a weird way, just because I suppose Eddie Hearn had to prove himself. His dad achieved kind of so much in the world of sports promotion, and then his son came into the fray and had to do things on his own terms and on his own merit, and sort of that to me was just kind of funny and kind of interesting. Like at the beginning when Eddie Hearn started out, no one liked him or trusted him, no one thought much of him. And I think there's a running joke now that people sort of make a joke that they don't like him, when actually I think probably a lot of people do, because he's done a lot of boxing. But yeah, I just found that kind of cool, kind of fun.
Yeah, is Eddie Hearn, is he on record yet as going, hang on a second, what? Or is he like, yeah, exactly, that's exactly who I am?
I don't think so. You probably have something to say about that, I'm sure.
I think it'd be the biggest compliment in the world for Eddie Hearn that Sean Finn models him on him.
Yeah, we'll see about that one.
come here. While you bring up boxing, right? Can I talk to you a bit about A Prayer Before Dawn? Because the fight scenes in A Prayer Before Dawn, I don't know if people will be familiar with this, but it's set in a Thai prison where you're playing an English prisoner who is trying to fight for his life. By all accounts, the fight scenes were pretty severe and quite intense for you. There was no stunt double, there was no body double. This was you actually sparring and fighting against real people. So are you into fighting? Were you into boxing anyway? Was that a kind of natural thing for you to get into, or is that where your kind of love of the sport comes from?
I've done a little bit of boxing, not much, and then now I'm kind of now I do a lot more kind of box or Thai box, once or twice a week, and and I love it, but yeah, I guess I gained a lot of the sort of passion for it from out there, from training every single day in Thailand and Atlanta before that, and kind of running, like I didn't used to run much. I used to just lift weights and stuff like that and do judo. And then I started running in Thailand for this thing, and I kind of really got into that. And I started getting back into it since we've been in quarantine, because obviously you can't do any gym work. So, but yeah, for me, boxing probably came from Thailand. It's Thai boxing out there is such a big part of their way of life.
So you're literally filming in a Thai jail, and there are former inmates who are coming to fight you. And even outside of their role in the movie, you're the Westerner who's the actor, who's the big shot, who's here, and they're allowed to hit you. I suspect they were taking advantage of the opportunity at the time.
Yeah, there were a few moments. I was going to these kind of spit and sawdust camps with my trainer. We were just hitting up all these kind of really raggo camps in Bangkok, and yes, a few times like they would see this white guy from the UK with the director came in, had a camera and stuff, and I think they'd want to try it on with me. So the sparring used to get a bit hairy, because obviously we'd do we'd do stuff like body sparring and things like that, and grappling, and it used to get a bit hairy, man. But I kind of enjoyed that. And when we were doing the film, we were sparring, and then there's some small bits of choreography in there. And I remember fighting the Southeast Asian. There's a guy who'd been in the prison in which we filmed. He'd been there for 7 years. The prison was closed down, the oldest prison in Thailand. We repopulated with all the officers and loads of ex-cons from around Thailand, and career criminals and people who've been inside for years and years and years. And they actually got a lot of the officers who just moved to the brand new prison down the road to come back and film in that prison, which was great. So that guy knew one of the officers, and they're like having a laugh and stuff. And he'd been there 7 years. He showed me the bed in which he slept, and I remember sparring with him. And the reason I could spar with him was because he was a lower weight category, and I was sort of trained how to kind of keep away from him and keep him at arm's length, and AJ the guy. And then he got up in my guard and sent me to space, and the camera's rolling, and I grab him, and you sort of in Thai boxing you can clinch people, and it's different to boxing. You can actually grab hold of people. So I'm grabbing hold of him, camera's rolling. We used to do long takes, and I'm kind of half there, half not, and then eventually I come back to, and I push him away, and we carry on the sparring, and then we do the choreography at the end, where I sort of batter him, and it was kind of moments like that which I think, as weird as they were and as difficult as they were, I guess it made it more authentic in some ways.
And also make you feel alive, right?
Yeah.
That's the whole point of doing anything, is to feel alive when you're doing this. It's like, where am I? I'm in Thailand against some guy who was in this prison for 7 years, and I'm fighting him, and there's a camera over there. That's like
I've taken a few knocks, but that was definitely I think the hardest knock I've ever taken, for sure. And I think it's important to have that when you're doing a boxing film, right?
Yeah, totally. And just in terms of career as well, like you can play different roles, but I think for moments that you can look back on and go, well, that was me doing something that people didn't expect me to do, that I didn't expect myself to be able to do. And then I came out the other side of it and it was like, this is really good stuff I'm doing.
Yeah, it was a great experience and a great opportunity. And John Stefan Zever, the filmmaker, is just he's just wonderful. And I'm so grateful because I wanted to do a film like that. You know, I looked up to Tom Hardy and Bronson and Fassbender in Hunger and those kind of films. And they're true stories. They're very physical performances, obviously very different. You know. And I was like, if I need to do a film like that. If I really want to kind of put myself in a slightly different bracket, I need to go and do a film that's a true story that puts my body on the line and puts me on the line physically and emotionally, and is completely immersive. And then I was lucky enough to do it with Prayer, and I feel very grateful because those films are so hard to get made, and less so they're getting made now. Like even especially with what's going on, like with COVID, you know, those films are just gonna disappear, and it's gonna be mainly television, I think, and the spandex superhero stuff.
Yeah, for the next while. Anyway, there's always a reaction. This is the OTB Culture Hall of Fame, sponsored by Now TV, and we ask people to nominate something that a piece of work that they love, that if it's on TV, you're not flicking past. What's yours?
Well, I've got to say, my favourite film is probably City of God, which I watched when I was, in my mid-teens at my mate's house. I used to go to my mate's house to watch all the 18s when I was like 13, 14. 14, 15, and I wasn't allowed to watch them at home. So I used to go there and watch Godfather and Goodfellas and Jackie Brown and the Tarantinos and watch City of God there, and it just stuck with me, and it kind of, just as a complete kind of epic story that spans years and follows these characters through different periods of their life and different decades was I just thought was incredible. You know, it's set in the favelas in Brazil, and it's just wild, man. A wild, true story.
It's got the most amazing soundtrack as well. When we send reporters to Brazil for the World Cup and for the Olympics, every time they were on, we would introduce them with the No Caminho do Bem, just the bass line from that. And everybody is immediately happy and going, right, this is going to be a really interesting piece of radio that we're about to create because of the soundtrack. And obviously you ripped it off completely. Yeah.
I actually think it's a great kind of lockdown film because it's quite escapist. Obviously, it's not the cheeriest of films, but it's great escapism. You know, a hot sort of beautiful country, very, very far from here and very, very far from our lives.
That's such a good point, actually. I think the last thing anybody wants to click on right now is anything to do with a pandemic or anything too close to home a little bit. Like, it's interesting that you mentioned going over to your friend's house watching Tarantino films as a kid, because I wanted to just get your brief take on the depiction of violence and how well it is being done at the moment in Gangs of London, because it is spectacular. The fight scenes, I'm 6 episodes in, so I think basically the first 4 episodes all end with just unbelievable cinematic, violent experiences. I just love to get your take on that and how that's transferred from you as a kid watching Tarantino to now being part of this extravaganza of violence.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's usually those kind of stunts, especially in television, are a secondary thing, and you know, they'll get someone in to sort of hoover them up, and you know, no discredit to anyone, but it's not usually the main focus. And then in this, it was put a lot further to the forefront. Jude Poyer, the stunt coordinator, was working with Gareth and Corin and Xavier and doing these incredible set pieces, and it's this infusion of Eastern cinema, you know, this sort of East Asian kind of cinema, with the kind of Hollywood sheen set on the sort of gritty streets of London, and it's interesting because it's like some people, it's difficult for them to get it, and I, you know, it's quite almost cartoonish and heightened and very well choreographed and over the top, but it's a different style of filmmaking. It's a different style of cinema coming into our UK TV shows. So it's just something new for people and different. And I thought it was a breath of fresh air.
It's adrenalizing, right? Like you're watching those fight scenes going, ooh, ah, ooh. And there's very few TV shows that actually are able to do that anymore.
Yeah, and what I actually found was I just was so shocked and kind of impressed with some of them that I would just sort of burst out laughing, or burst out just sort of like screeching, like what the hell, because I couldn't believe it. And they're the reactions you want, because it's entertainment at the end of the day. And I certainly got that from a few of the scenes. I'm like, it's like when you think it's all said and done, Gareth Evans drops a whole load more craziness in, or Corin Hardy. And yeah, for me, I just found it quite entertaining.
Can I ask if there's going to be a season 2? Like, I deliberately do not Google anything to do with a television show that I'm currently watching, because you will get spoilers. And I'm sure there is an answer to this already online.
I mean, I think, if the people want it, then they'll do it. I think there's a whole new other world that could be explored, kind of deeper and a wider net. It's called Gangs of London, but London is one of the most multicultural cities in the world, and there's a whole load more cities and a whole load more countries and a whole load more levels that could be explored. So, yeah, I mean, depending on how it goes down, I think there could well be they could well do something. We'll see.
I've got to ask you about the Irish aspect to this whole thing. So Colm Meaney is kind of an Irish national father figure because of the films that he made in the 90s, in particular, The Snapper. And obviously he's your dad in this. The Irish dads have a particular kind of standing in Ireland and Irish society. Were you aware of any of that? Did you tap into any of that at all, or was that all kind of unnecessary?
Oh no, of course, man. I think I'm a big fan of Colm's, and he came on to the project a little bit after I'd signed on, and I know they were trying to find that role, and obviously it's a very difficult role to cast because he's in flashbacks mainly, really. But you need somebody with real presence, real screen presence, and somebody who evokes that exact feeling that you just described. And that's so hard to do. I mean, you can only probably, I can only think of, one on one hand, people who could do that, really, or if that. And I think getting him was a real coup, because Finn Wallace's shadow is cast across the whole show, and Colm can come in and do 1-2 scenes, and you immediately know who this guy is, know how serious a gangster he is, and how serious a player he is, and he just does it in a couple of scenes, and then the rest is through flashbacks. So yeah, it was great to have him on board and great to work with him.
And were the gangsters, were the Wallaces always Irish, or if for example they had cast a Scottish actor in that role, would he have done an Irish accent and been Irish, or was the intention it became Irish when it became Colm Meaney?
I think the whole idea was that it was Irish. Yeah. Don't mess with the Irish.
Turns out they have an army ready to go whenever they need one.
Yeah.
Certainly, if you've got the money that the Wallaces do.
Spend this for loose there, son.
Yeah, exactly. Listen, we really enjoyed talking to you about it. It is a massive smash hit success. People are definitely talking about it. Do you feel that at the moment? Can you feel that bubbling up?
Not really, because I'm just sitting in my house. But I'm sure when I get out on the streets, I'll get a bit more of a feel for it.
And you must have felt that with Peaky, right? When you kind of see that, as you said, it was word of mouth and it was a slow burn, but then it explodes and it goes global. Like, this is, really is going to go global too.
Yeah, well, Peaky took a long time, man. Peaky, only really started properly getting noticed, recognised and stuff was after season 3. And then I know it took on even more of a huge sort of following, probably season 4 onwards. So Peaky's a slow burner, and a lot of these things are. seems like this one is moving more quickly in terms of just people getting on board with it. I don't know if that's because of quarantine or the lockdown or sort of the kind of, the in-your-face sort of brashness of it. Who knows? But it seems like people are getting onto it a little more quickly, which is, I suppose, in this day and age, is important, really, because that's what gets you the opportunity to do more.
Yeah, for sure. Well, listen, Joe, you've been great with your time. Congratulations on this. It is really great. And hopefully you get back to some proper one-on-one sparring out in the real world fairly soon.
Thank you, man. Good luck to yourselves. Thanks for chatting.
Cheers. Really appreciate that. And our guest this week was Joe Cole talking about Gangs of London, which is, of course, available to stream right now on Now TV. That was the OTB Culture Hall of Fame this week. Remember, on Now TV, you can stream award-winning dramas such as Game of Thrones and Parks and Recreation. See you next week.
The OTB Culture Hall of Fame.
Brought to you by Now TV. Watch whatever you're in the mood for.
Yeah, so that was Joe Cole from Gangs of London with us there on our latest OTB Culture Hall of Fame on OTB AM. You can listen back to the previous episodes where we had Louisa Harlan from Derry Girls. We had Kenny Cunningham talking about Fawlty Towers. We had Andy Lee talking about Rocky 3, and we had Stephanie Preisner and Dermot Kennedy with us as well. So it's been a brilliant introduction to the OTB Culture Hall of Fame, brought to you by Now TV. Now, Dan McDonnell and Ronan Mullen are on standby for this.
I'm not worried about it. I can stand over this. Cora Staunton, Lee McHale, Kevin Kilban and Kieran MacDonald.
OTB AM's Mount Rushmore.
Yes, it is time for OTB AM's Mount Rushmore, and today we're doing Louth. It's fairly straightforward. Ronan is the OTB selector. Dan McDonnell is the OTB challenger, so he gets to boot off one of Ronan's and present. He's going to present his own four, but obviously he gets to edit for one of them, and we will have a last pitch as well for you. Before we get going here, where will this actually be? Ronan, where in Louth are we going to have the Mount Rushmore?
Well, it has to be in picturesque Cooley, Ger, and I think you're going to find that Cooley has a big say in this Mount Rushmore. We'll get to it in a minute, but one of their most famous sons definitely will be, I think he's coming in slot number 2 in Mount Rushmore here in Louth. Right, and Dan, was this hard? I mean, surely it's not hard. There aren't that many. It's not a rich sporting tapestry you guys have to choose from, is it?
This is just a poor wind-up attempt, Ger. It was hard. Yeah, it is difficult. For the smallest county, they've a decent enough history. Decent enough. Probably more so in my chosen sport, but also across other sports as well. There's some high performers. I think it's a decent enough field, I have to say. I don't know what Ronan's gone for, and we'll see sort of how it plays out across sort of generations. I'd have my view about probably when the strongest era might have been. I would have grown up hearing a lot about it, but yeah, I know. I mean, we've had our say. We in a way in international even events that maybe people from other counties haven't. We'll move on to that. Maybe.
Can I just talk about the false advertising about the wee county for a start? The population of Drogheda is nearly the same as the population of the entire county of Monaghan. Drogheda is 40,000, Monaghan is 60,000. The population of Louth is like twice the size of Monaghan. It's 128,000 according to the last census. So, it has always been a populous area with a big urban conurbation in Dundalk, and Drogheda has obviously exploded in the last 2 decades. So, in fairness, there are some incredible sporting achievements, but you should have at that level. It is a county that needs to produce people who are international sports people.
That is true, of course, but I mean, maybe you should add that caveat every time you refer to them as the wee county or the smallest county in the country, as tends to be the case. The reference is no, of course, and the history of the county as well, and sport in the county that, garrison towns, I guess, and it's something that's probably come up with Athlone and might come up with even with Sligo, and there's places in the country, say, where football or soccer, as people would call it, would be very strong, and there's obvious reasons for that in tandem with the history of the place. So yeah, I take your point. It's not surprising. Even we'll probably talk about some of the say the outstanding, more latter day sort of football players, the likes of Gary Kelly. Ian Hart. Gary Kelly would have played for Home Farm. The access to Dublin, for example, would be pretty good if you're an outstanding young sportsman. I mean, Rob Kearney would have, I think he would have been schooled in Clongowes. There is obviously, you're close enough if you're, to the centre of the sporting hub in Ireland, I guess, and that possibly is a factor.
Okay, let's get into it. Ronan, who is your first nominee?
Well, I think Dan will agree this is about as big a shoe-in as any shoe-in can be on any of these Mount Rushmores. Number one cornerstone on this monument is Stephen Staunton. And I would wager that by the age of 21, he probably had a CV like on par with anything we've seen in Irish sport. Before we even get to what he did in England, right, have to mention, as was recounted by Keevin Riley in the Democrat a couple of years ago, like he was a prodigious GA star, played for Art Esmond's under-10s when he was 6 years old. Senior debut for Clan na Gael at the age of 16. That was in 1985. Not only had the Clans not won a Louth senior championship title in 26 years, they hadn't won a championship game in 6 years. Staunton's first year in the panel, they play Roach Emmets, neighbours, derby match. They straight up don't like each other. And who scores the winning goal in that final? Young Steve Staunton. So a year later, he's gone to Liverpool, who were obviously the preeminent club side in the world, probably at the time. Kenny Dalglish. He's only in the door a year. 1989 FA Cup winners, 1990 league winners. That summer, he goes to the World Cup, Ireland's maiden World Cup voyage, starts every single game. And like, that's it, done and dusted, legacy secure. But he just went on and on, played in 2 more World Cups, 13 World Cup appearances. 13. Started every game in 1990, 94, captained them in 2002. 2 domestic trophies with Aston Villa, Ger, as you well know. 455 top flight appearances all told. Ireland's first ever Centurion. And then his playing career ended in 05 and he kind of sailed off into the sunset, unbesmirched, and that was it.
I mean, what a wise decision it was for him
That was the end of the Steve Staunton story right there.
And just live it out, telling stories about the glory days, and everybody loves him. That was exactly, whoever gave him that career advice was the best career advice he ever got.
Oh, it was beautiful. After dinner speaking, a few articles here and there, Sunday supplement, but that's it.
Yeah, and beloved of everybody. Dan, all joking aside, is there a case that his legacy has been damaged by his managerial career?
Well, not in Louth though. You know what I mean? Like I was at an event in Dundalk recently, where he spoke, and there would have been a comment from the floor. Along the lines of, remember what a great man this is, or I can't remember what it was, but words to that effect. And there was sort of a big round of applause. And, I would have found that as someone from Louth who would have covered Steve Staunton's time, and would have been quite critical of him, and would have taken a bit of local grief, I guess, for that. And there would have been naturally, there's a sensitivity of protection of one of their own. And I think obviously in the wider sporting discussion, there's no doubt that when you mention his name now, I guess to anyone under, I don't want to be disrespectful, even to Owen, because of course they know what a great player he was, but I think for a lot of people under 30, say, they might think of him, the manager, perhaps, before they think of the player. And even things like, the accent, his way of speaking, all these things that were parodied, they were part of his, they were part of the lampooning of him. But in many, that was him. He actually had his accent. He's kept his identity. He's still very much a local in the eyes of anyone, even though he hasn't lived in Dundalk for years. But when he's home, he is. And of course, you mention his name now, and there's always a wise crack around the corner. But I've always hoped, and I know for a fact he has no time for press. He'd have no time for me or anyone who was on that beat. But I really do sincerely hope that with the passing of time, we go less to the managerial thing and just reflect on the achievement. Because as Ronan said, three World Cups, first player to be a Centurion for Ireland, also played for that Liverpool team when Liverpool were the kings. And you can just go into the rest of his Premier League career too, the longevity. So to me, it's the outstanding candidate, and hopefully his legacy is that.
There's no question that the legacy doesn't damage it to the point where he gets taken off Mount Rushmore. I'm just curious, lads, from a Louth perspective, what you can often have in a county is a bit of a siege mentality where people really go to bat for their own county person. Is there a sense in Louth that maybe he got too hard a time as Ireland manager, that somehow he is a victim in some sort of conspiracy or anything like this? Do people in Louth stick up for him basically and have blind love for Steve Staunton, the manager?
I don't know. Colin did a piece for Off the Ball a couple of months ago, sort of defending the Staunton reign, and I wouldn't necessarily go along with it because he had a great pool of players, probably didn't get the best out of them. I remember him playing John O'Shea at right back, Steve Finn at left back when they were playing in the opposite positions for their clubs. Like little things like that just made no sense. Granted, he was robbed of Stephen Ireland. You know, he would look like a keystone player for that side the way it was going. Scored the goal against Wales. You know, was brilliant in the few games that he actually played. But the managerial thing, it's a non-starter for me. Like Alan Shearer was an apocalyptic manager for Newcastle, and he's remembered as no one ever talks about the fact that he got them relegated. And you go through any Roy Keane, like one season aside with Sunderland when he had Premier League money in the Championship and got them promoted. Do you know, like
Newcastle never lost to Cyprus.
Ah, well, they lost to a lot of teams though. But like Tony Adams was a terrible manager. Bobby Charlton, Magic Johnson, Wayne Gretzky. They were all terrible managers. It doesn't mean they weren't amazing players. And as I said, by 1990, he'd probably done more than 99% of Irish footballers, or what any footballer could hope to achieve. He'd won everything. He played in the World Cup. You know, and what he did, like he would have been a prodigious GA talent if he had stuck around. He could have done anything. And
Okay,
what a left foot as well.
I think we can all agree Steve Staunton is going on, and we probably do all need to do a bit more work on reclaiming Staunton, the footballer, as the main thing that we remember. Like, you know, his leadership on the field in 2002 in difficult circumstances. He played really well in that World Cup. He was actually a good ball player as a centre-back, as well as somebody who could defend and organise a defence around him, and probably doesn't get very much credit for that. So let's move on. Ronan, who have you got next?
Well, I would say possibly the most underappreciated Irish sports star in modern history is Rob Kearney. And he's going on the Cooley Mountains. He's going on Mount Rushmore. And it felt like ever since he got that jersey, like he was trying to fend off the next successor, the heir apparent to the fullback jersey. And he just kept batting them away. And like, we can get to the Roll of Honour if you want. But just before that, I think his abiding legacy will be that story, apocryphal or not, where he went into training camp and basically called the Munster lads out. He was a freshman. He went in and said, you guys care more about winning in your red jersey than you do for Ireland. And whether that was true or not, you know, it kind of changed things. And from then, he started for the Grand Slam team, like just going through the Roll of Honour. It's crazy. Started for both Grand Slam teams, 4 Six Nations championships all told, 3 World Cup appearances, man of the match in Chicago, 95 caps, and he probably should get the chance to get to 100 caps. For some reason, he's been scapegoated as the guy from Japan. And Owen was in Japan. He'll be able to tell you that there were other below par performers there, and they haven't got the same stick that he, for some reason, has gotten. So that's just his Ireland career. Leinster-wise, 4 Heineken Cups, 5 Celtic Leagues, Challenge Cup, European Player of the Year in 2012. And then my favourite Rob Kearney memory is in 2009, as I mentioned, off the back of the European Cup, off the back of a Grand Slam, went to the Lions. Ian McGeechan picked Lee Byrne at full-back against South Africa in the first test, and Rob Kearney came on. Lee Byrne got injured, and the South Africans looked at this young lad and thought, we'll just put loads of high balls in on top of him. And he dealt with everything with aplomb. Got that Cooley Kickham's background in Lead GA. He obviously played for Lead at minor level, and I think they took Dublin to a replay in the semi-finals, so that was a decent crop of Lead players. So Rob Kearney, I think, definitely an institution, one of Irish rugby and Irish sports' most decorated players ever. So he's a shoe-in for this.
A shoe-in, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I have put him in my 4, so I can't really sort of object to anything that Ronan has said there. That means it probably wouldn't have been sort of my number 1 as such, or competing for my number 1. It's a strange thing, really, and maybe it's just a reflection of my own view. I think of Rob Kearney in terms of Leinster as opposed to Louth, you know, in terms of, like, you know, the imprint he's left. But then he can pick away with that with any sort of, you know, any international. I mean, Steve Staunton left home very young as well, you know, and like, there's no doubting his international CV and track record. I mean, I would remember sort of growing up, you know, reading the local papers, and Rob Kearney be a couple of years younger, and reading about his GAA exploits. He was always in the local papers as, like, you know, the star of the GAA team, and then the reference to what he was doing a bit in rugby, and then all of a sudden, bang, you know, he's like he's a household name. And his overall story, like, is tremendous. And, like, as I said, he is the international contender, I suppose, of recent times. You know, he's been at the top level really much throughout his career. So, like, yeah, I mean, he's the Leinster icon. I suppose you can go into the demographic of Louth and what the sports are within Louth that maybe are the main sports. And to me, I would always think of football again, soccer to clarify, and then Gaelic football, and they are the ones that are the heartbeat. I mean, rugby's always been there. There are rugby clubs, but he's someone who obviously, as I said, he went to Bordered and Clongowes. He may not sound like he's from Louth, especially, but then I know that as well. That you are he's not the local icon maybe in some ways that you would have with some other candidates, but he's still. I mean, look, his achievements are absolutely extraordinary, really. So he's in my 4, as I said. He was my number 1, but he's in there for sure.
He must be an unbelievable achiever in the sport of rugby, given how much we know you hate rugby, Dan, for him to be on your Mount Rushmore. I'm going to say that is unbelievable ringing endorsement from you to put a rugby man on your own Mount Rushmore, given how much you hate the sport.
Hate is a bit strong, Ger, and I've tried to leave all. I'm going to be accused maybe later on of bringing some kind of sporting preferences into this, but I think you have to suspend any. You are putting a lot of responsibility on us here. You can't put 4 people from your county onto some onto this Mount Rushmore, this elevate them to the highest high, and then just try and settle scores somehow, as part of the process. So
fair play.
No, I mean his weight of achievement is incredible. So he's in my 4. I mean, we'll see how things pan out, but yeah.
We have consensus at least on half of the mountain. That's not a bad start. Who is next for you, Ronan?
Well, the first 2, as I said, they were cast iron. I've tried to delineate a little bit between the sports. So we've had a soccer representative, rugby representative. So this is Gaelic games, and obviously hurling's not a huge stronghold, but we did produce the greatest hurler of all time, Mullen, and we don't need to get into too much, in depth about that. He was an intergenerational talent, not just a man, a demigod.
Was he John or Dundalk?
Well, he was a bit of everything. I think RD is actually named after Mullen.
RD is Ardea, which is the place of Ferdia. So it was as the legend went, it was the banks of the River Dee where the fight took place.
Well, see, using the word legend suggests this stuff didn't actually happen. But as we all know, we've seen the footage. This guy was an unbelievable stickman, and what he did with Queen Maeve, let's just unbelievable stuff. But on the Gaelic football side of things, this is where it gets difficult, because I know the reverence that 57 team is held in, and I've spoken to people that were there. Joe Carroll, who was the former editor of the Democrat, was 11 at the time, and he was kind of putting in perspective what that team achieved. And I always think it's a little bit poignant talking about these teams of decades past, because in the current landscape, it's just not feasible that a team like Louth could even compete. So to talk about All-Ireland winners from Louth is crazy. So just to give a couple of them I mentioned before I actually give my selection, like Stephen White was considered the cream of that team in 1957. Frank Lynch, 18 years old at the time, brilliant talent. Dermot O'Brien, who I'm sure Dan will mention, was captain, acclaimed musician as well. And other lads that were knocking on the door throughout that decade got to the final in 1950, to the semi-final in 1953. Tom Conlon played in all those games. Jimmy McDonnell actually made a comeback in 1957, scored a hat-trick in the semi-final, and then got to the final, so they all got their medal. But just in that context, talking about great Louth footballers, I'm picking Paddy Keenan, and it's because I can't let him fall victim to his birth certificate. It's not his fault that he wasn't born in that era, and had he been around in 1957, he's 100% in the team, because he's probably the most impactful Louth sports person I've seen personally with my own 2 eyes. And he was Roy the Rovers for Louth. He was just amazing. He did everything, and he's 100% in my Mount Rushmore.
Okay. Do you have a Gaelic footballer on yours, Dan?
Yeah, no, I do. I have Stephen White in mine. I think, Louth won 4 Leinster titles between 47 and the early 60s. They were All-Ireland champions in 1957. They went to a final in 50. It's again, it's not my first sport, but I would have sort of grown up again aware of these tales. My next door neighbour Nicky Rowe would have been part of the team in the early 50s, and to me, growing up, probably going to Louth games in the late 80s, early 90s, and there was some good players around then, like Stephen White, and Colin Kelly, and there was occasional runs. But to me, even the discussion then that Louth could have been like serial winners, serial Leinster champions, All-Ireland winners is sort of incredible to me. So I really wanted to sort of get the right candidate when I was looking back. And to me, I just think it has to be from that era. I accept it. Like, I don't like and I accept that Paddy Keenan is an exceptional talent. And I mean, Ronan mentioned Queeveen Riley earlier, who covers the game locally. I think he's put him as his all-time best. But and I have to bow to that. And they probably won't take kindly to me suddenly just like disputing it in some way. But I mean, Louth nearly won a Leinster championship in 2010. They won a Division 2. Like, Paddy Keenan's no doubt been a Royal Rovers figure. And maybe it's a bit like Matty Ford and Wexford and other cases. You have this outstanding star at a lesser county, and there's almost a sadness that they don't get to express their talent. And I do accept that. And I mean, people would say about Stephen Mealy as well. It was someone, a long-standing player throughout the sort of 80s and 90s, who had an exceptionally long career too. But to me, I just think you have to look back to that time. You have to look back to that time where Louth were the top of the world in GAA terms. I mean, Stephen White, in 1984, the GAA did their team of the century, and Stephen White was on it. And I accept that Paddy Keenan is Louth's one All-Star, but the All-Stars obviously started in 1971. If the All-Stars had existed throughout the 50s, there would have been multiple Louth winners, and you can make a case for Dermot O'Brien. I've had people say Frank Lynch, and Ollie Riley. There's other names that could be thrown around from an era where they competed consistently at the top. Now, what I like about Stephen White as well is that he was the father of Stephen White, who was the Louth star of the 90s, and also like a brother-in-law of Jimmy McDonnell, who Ronan mentioned there. So I think if you're taking this thing as a Mount Rushmore as a reflection of a time, I think Stephen White is like the perfect representation of Louth GAA. And I think, in compiling this list, we're in danger of, like, if you have Rob Kearney and you've got Paddy Keenan and you've got Steve Staunton, it would almost suggest that sport in Louth only started in 1990, 1988, when actually, and I'll probably come into that with my other selection, we're forgetting a time where Louth were top of the sporting debate in the country in terms of GAA and also in football as well, and that'll be my other selection. But to me, Stephen White has to be, and it has to be the GAA rep.
Ronan, answer that.
No, I totally, like, as I said, I kind of prefaced my point with that like, it's hard to overlook the 57 team, but I've just seen Paddy Keenan, what he did for that Louth team, and we had some great days. Dan referenced the beating Donegal in the League Division 2 final was amazing. Took Tyrone, who were All-Ireland champions, like, they had them beaten, and Owen Mulligan scores a point to take it to a replay, and Paddy Keenan was immense that day. And then Paddy Keenan, like, the scandal of 2010, which we don't have to get into or relive right now, but, like, if people want to look it up, the ball comes in and Paddy Keenan with a Tom Cruise-esque dive across the line in Mission Impossible to block. Oh, it was just, and then the ball flies up in the air, and the rest is history. Joe Sheridan throws the ball in basketball style and Meath run away with the title. But there was an equivalence there. Louth winning a Leinster title in this era is almost up there with what was achieved before, because it just seems so unrealistic now that they might get anywhere near it. So that was why that was such a heartbreaking moment for everybody in Louth. And Paddy Keenan was totemic in that team. So as I said, I'm going off people that I've actually, for the most part anyway, people that I've seen myself, and I was just so enamoured with him when I saw him play in person.
I mean, there is a responsibility on you here, though. This will be chiselled into cold, hard granite, so it's not fixable.
But as I said, like, I consulted people who were there in 57, and my main question was, had Paddy Keenan been there in 1957, would he have been in the starting 15? And each person I asked that question said, absolutely.
But I think it's possible. It's possible that a lot of other players from different eras would have got into the team as well. I think we are, and as I said, I take the view of the people who've watched Paddy Keenan say he was a terrific player. I think he retired from inter-county level at 29, but still won, I think he won 6-7 Louth titles. So clearly, like, an inspirational presence in his generation. But are we in danger of, like, sort of big fish in small pond sort of logic ending up shaping the view? That allowed them to stand out, whereas you had a team who were consistently responsible for feats. You know, I read through a whole list of games from that era. You know, it's not just one or two, three notable games you pick out. I think you could pick out loads, but they're so far back in the archive that we don't have that reflection. And I think we probably do have a responsibility to go back through time and reflect that in our pick, rather than just having a 21st century wall. You know, I don't think that's the story of sport in Louth.
Okay, well, let's hear Ronan's fourth before we make him pick his final four, and then you get to remove one and replace one, Dan. So there's definitely a candidate here. You might replace Paddy Keenan. Who's your fourth, Ronan?
Well, again, I kind of trying to delineate a little bit. This is sort of like the miscellaneous section, so other sports and Eve McChrystal. I'm hopefully Dan can help me out with people I leave out here, but Eve McChrystal, brilliant gold or Paralympic gold medalist rather. Tommy Byrne, who we've had on the show, you know, great story there. Noel Carroll went to 2 Olympics. Sports Illustrated described him as one of the best middle distance runners in the world. He was born in Annagassan. Peter McArdle went to America, competed, won gold at the Pan American Games. So these are all worthy of mention. But just to put my boxing hat on, like obviously Jimmy McGee was a sort of transcendent figure from broadcasting into sport. I think everyone has a Jimmy McGee memory. And for me, obviously Katie Taylor in 2012 and Bernard Dunn, he covered all those nights. 11 Olympics, 10 World Cups, just quite a resume. But like Tom Sharkey, I did a piece on him for offtheball.com because he's not going to be on my Mount Rushmore, but it's just it's a crazy story. He was born in Dundalk in 1873, ran away from home at 12. Long story short, he joined naval force, got shipwrecked 4 times, decided to go to boxing. He was only 5'8", but he competed in the heavyweight division, fought for the de facto heavyweight championship of the world, really, against James J. Jeffries in what was the first fight ever recorded for use in a motion picture, and it was lit in the arena by Thomas Edison and Thomas Edison's film company. So that's an unbelievable story. His sporting merit probably doesn't justify him getting on the wall. But sticking with boxing, Amy Broadhurst, I think if we're going to be doing this in a few years' time, after Paris Olympics or whenever that's going to be, if this was on talent, she would probably be on the Mount Rushmore because she's one of the best boxers in the country. And I think she's surefire medalist. She's kind of got the Kelly Harrington situation going on where Katie Taylor was ahead of Kelly for so long, Kelly couldn't get to the Olympic Games. And now the opposite is true, where Kelly's going to the Olympics and Amy has to wait her turn. So I think she's a surefire. But just to denounce any notion that there's all Dundalk bias, I have to put some a Drogheda representative in here. So Tony Socks Byrne is getting my nod. And Ronnie Delaney got most of the plaudits, obviously, in 1956. But we had an unbelievable boxing team, so the more things change, the more they stay the same. We got 4 medals, and Tony Byrne got one of them. And it's just absolutely revered in Drogheda. Like, there's poetry written about this guy. I think he's the first Irish boxer to have a statue of him in his hometown. And, like, there was actually a fundraiser back in 56 to get him to the Olympics because, obviously, athletes had to fund their own way to get there. So this guy was just, as I said, revered, and it's good to have a Drogheda representative up there. So he's my number 4. He's my 4th pick.
Tony Socks Byrne, the boxer who won a bronze, I think, in Melbourne. Is that it? Okay.
Bronze at lightweight.
Lightweight bronze medalist in 1956. Okay, look, Olympic medals definitely get you into contention, and certainly he's your number 4. Who's your number 4, Dan?
Yeah, look, that's a valid shout. Right, my number 4 is Tommy McConville. Now, Tommy McConville is a legend of football in Dundalk. I'll explain my reasons because I was thinking about it last week, and he probably, he was on my thoughts. And then the more and more I thought about this, he sort of just went up the list every time. He went up my list every time. He just kept overtaking other people to the point where I just decided he had to get onto it. And I should mention around this time, look, we haven't mentioned Gary Kelly. We haven't mentioned Ian Hart. And I've almost taken the approach again that there's almost a generational aspect to this, that people talk about Louth as like a soccer county or a team that kind of is very strong in that, but it's not a soccer county because they got a load of good players in recent times. Like it's the history of the game. And I think sometimes, I've been following the other counties very closely and the thought process that has led to decisions. And I find sometimes I'd be objecting, I'd be like, Kevin Doyle, surely in Wexford, Kevin Doyle should be on it. But the view would be, and I've spoken to Kevin Doyle about this, that is a GAA county. He knows the reverence in which people are held then who've represented Wexford, at the highest level in terms of hurling, and they are the local heroes. And I think that there are places in the country where the footballers, the soccer players, are on the standing. They have that reverence of that GAA star in other counties. So I'm not disregarding Gary Kelly and Ian Harper. There's a generational thing. They're from a more recent time. Of course, they've had better careers than some I might mention. I would mention Joey Donnelly, by the way, from the 1930s, who was like the star of a star of the Irish team in that era. Like 10 times for Ireland, he played, scored 4 goals. But in international times, of the pre-Second World War era, he was an exceptional player by all accounts from Dundalk. There's also Barry Keogh in recent times, who would be a very beloved figure. He passed away age 40 in 2002, but that doesn't tell the half of his story. I mean, Barry Keogh was an outstanding player at 18, 19. Then he suffered cancer. He came back. Then he suffered illness in later life. And what could have been a brilliant career was curtailed, yet it was still a brilliant career in its time. But for me, I've gone for Tommy McConville. And I think he just ticks all the boxes to me for what a sportsman of Louth should represent, or any county should represent. You can list out the stats, and there's that, but there's just the stories that go with the stats as well. So he played 580 times for Dundalk. He made his debut in 1964. His last game for them was in 1986. He won 3 league titles with Dundalk and 3 league titles and 3 FAI Cups with Dundalk, but he also won a league with Waterford. And he was such a sort of a top player in his era that he was capped 6 times for Ireland in the early 70s. While starring for Dundalk and Waterford, he would spend his summers in America, where he was in the North American Soccer League and captained the team called the Washington Diplomats. So he would have played against Pele. He would have been involved in like the explosion of American football back then. And Tommy McConville was, a League of Ireland star by sort of winter, and then by summer he was going to America to play over there. In addition to his 6 caps with Ireland, he has 30 representative caps for League of Ireland representative teams, which was a massive deal, at the time. So he didn't just play against Pele in the States. He would have played against Maradona for a League of Ireland representative. He would have toured Brazil in '81 and played against Zico, and tells a story about going over to that game. And they were up that morning, and there was TV coverage, live TV coverage of a match on. And he said, "What game's on?" And they were saying, "No, that's your game tonight. They're covering it all day." And he was involved in this, like when football was a very different game with tours, right? Tommy McConville was the best Dundalk player of that era, at a time that I would have grown up. And I think this is important. Like, the history of Louth, even, like, you think of the 70s, you're thinking of the Troubles, you're thinking of El Paso, like you think of the reputation of the place. And I remember growing up speaking to neighbours of mine, people who grew up nearby, and they would talk about this time where Dundalk were like champions of Ireland, where they would have played European games against PSV Eindhoven, against Porto, would have played against Celtic, they would have played against Liverpool, they would have played against Spurs. Like in 1979, Tommy McConville, who was a defender, a top-class defender, famously missed actually a chance that would have put Dundalk into the quarterfinals of the European Cup, which to me is almost unthinkable. This could have happened. 2 years later, they played a great Spurs team that won the FA Cup, and they pushed them all the way. And throughout this time, like, Dundalk were competing at a European level on a regular basis. They were the top team in the country, and their best player was a local. Ger and Eoin, who was a League of Ireland legend, speaks about his era as a player, and he says the 2 outstanding players of the time was Pat Byrne of Shamrock Rovers 4 in a row and Tommy McConville. Tommy McConville passed away in 2013. I knew him, but I really didn't appreciate almost till he passed the career that he actually had, like at the top level for the entirety of his career. Like he when he went to Waterford, a deal was done to join Manchester United, with Frank O'Farrell was the manager. The Waterford directors asked for too much money at the last minute. The deal fell through. He went on strike, and he didn't get that chance, right, to go at that international level that Staunton and others did. but what he did throughout his time at home, while living at home, like there was a person walking the streets of Dundalk who was, what did you do last week? Well, he would have played against Pele or Zico or Maradona, but he also represented a team based in Louth in European field. He played for his country. He played international level, and also just to bring it back to the start point, ironically enough, that Clan-na-Gael team that Steve Staunton played in that won the Louth title, I think in '85. Tommy McConville also played for that team. I think he was 39. He won a Louth title. At 47, I think he helped Bank Rovers, a local team, play for the FAI Cup, qualify for the FAI Cup. So into his 40s, he was still one of these figures that we all know in our communities that, like, they were that brilliant, talented player, and they love sports so much they were still playing into their 40s, like at actually a very good level that maybe is the level that some only could ever reach in their life, and he was doing it then. So the more I think about it, I just think that we need to reflect that era in it. And I think the fact that Tommy McConville is a local who achieved everything while living locally, but also went to an international field, for me, he has to go on it.
Yeah, because I think the point you make there, like you can make a case Gary Kelly had a better career. You can make a case even Ian Hart had a better career. But actually, the way you've sold it there is pretty compelling. And I get the whole point of having somebody be on the mountain who is an inspiration to people who are still there, as opposed to, oh, your dream is to do really well and get the hell out of here. It's like, no. You can stick around. You can have a great career, and we can dream big and still live on the peninsula or in one of these towns. Ronan, your four before we get down to make an edit. Who are your four? Are you sticking with the four you brought to us? Have you been swayed in any way?
No, just on what Dan has been saying about Tommy McConville, and I had him down here as well. I spoke to Gavin McLaughlin, who's heading up media things with Dundalk now, and he made similar points to Dan regarding Tommy. Like, he was very much of the town. And similarly, Joey Donnelly, like, if my grandparents were picking this list, or my parents, Joey Donnelly was proprietor in town, had a shop in the heart of the town. So, like, was not only this international figure who scored against Nazi Germany in 1936 and was just an unbelievable footballer, he was also visible, unlike maybe other people in this list. You saw them on a day-to-day basis. I think that does mean a lot. But I'm going to stick with my four just on that. So it's Steve Staunton number one for sure, Rob Kearney number two, absolutely certainly, Paddy Keenan for me, just for the reasons I outlined, and then Tony Soxburn, a Drogheda representative, an Olympic medalist, and just a revered figure in County Louth. Okay,
so let's hear the last pitch from Wayne Kieran's. Have a look.
Hi everyone, Wayne Kieran's, Louth Senior Football Manager here. Louth Sporting Heroes, obvious choice, but for me it have to be Stephen Staunton. Growing up playing a lot of football, a lot of soccer in and around the Dock area in the 90s, in Kennedy Cups and Milk Cup competitions, and to hear the stories of a young guy who played in the same teams before us and basically left his GAA club, Clan-na-Gael, to go and sign for Liverpool. He was basically living every young lad's dream. And for him to go on and have the amazing career he had in the Premier League with Liverpool and Villa, and of course getting over 100 caps for Ireland, he really was a hero to us and an absolute inspiration. And not only was he an unbelievable athlete with an amazing left foot, he was a really good guy as well, who was always there to offer us young players support and advice throughout his career. And while he was a massive loss to Louth GAA, there's no doubt about it, he would have played for Louth for many years. For him to have the amazing career he had, we're all very proud of him in Louth, and he really is a true Louth sporting hero.
Okay, so Wayne Kieran's has doubled down on the importance of Stan to Louth, and that's fair enough. We hope maybe that he would settle the GAA debate about Keenan versus Stephen White, but that didn't happen. So Dan, it's time to make your change, and that will be it for the Louth Mount Rushmore.
I feel like, can I make a last pitch to Ronan to please replace Paddy Keenan with another GAA person, or I'm going to be blamed for taking a GAA person off it. Because I couldn't replace Stephen White. I couldn't replace a 57 player. But I have to say, I just think we have to avoid this being a recency bias dominated list. And I'm glad there is a Drogheda representation, like with Soxburn. I thought actually you might go for the Sailor Tom. That would have been my prediction where Ronan was going to go. But I have to stay true to, I suppose, what I was going to do initially. My order of play, I had Tommy McConville behind Steve Staunton, so he's next up for me, and I'm putting him on the 4. There's no doubt I'm putting him in the 4. I would, I'd be looking at Soxburn, I'd be looking at Paddy Keenan, and if it was a GAA player of the 50s, then I'd probably be looking at replacing Soxburn. But a player of recent times, I don't really, with all due respect to his achievements and what he's done, I think if we're having a Mount Rushmore to reflect the sporting history of Louth over a prolonged period, I'd rather Tommy McConville up there than Paddy Keenan. But I say it with regret because I'd love Stephen White to be there as well. But I'm sticking with Tommy McConville. Of all the counties to have 2 soccer players, I think it's probably fair enough that there would be. I regret that there's no one from the golden era GAA up there, but I can't change my mind on account of Ronan's selections. I have Tommy McConville number 2, and he was going on for me, and he is, and I'm going to pop him on there and replace Paddy Keenan.
Okay, so the final Mount Rushmore is Steve Staunton, Rob Kearney, Tommy McConville and Tony Soxburn. Are you happy with your day's work, lads?
I'd like to have Stephen White up there or someone from that era, so it's not especially satisfying. But
Ronan,
yeah.
I thought I had a nice balance with every sport represented, but no, I take Dan's point. It's just Paddy Keenan. I'm just so easy able to quantify him in my own mind. I've seen him play, and I just like the reservations I had were against 57. I just know how good he was, and I've been able to corroborate it with other people that he was as good as those players.
But now he's gone. He's gone now.
He's gone.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think we can definitely agree on the first 2. I think they're Stonewall in the mountain, and then I suppose it is a matter of opinion. Like Barry Keogh, as Dan mentioned.
No. You can't be introducing any more. We're way over time.
But Barry Keogh would have been for tremendous as well. But,
like I'd love to put Barry Keogh, and again, like he had trials at Manchester United alongside Paul McGrath. Cancer diagnosis around then. Like I put up a piece he did for the Dundalk website in a Players Tribune style, which was years old, and it's just.
Do you want to replace Sox with a 57 player? Last chance.
With a 57 player?
Yeah.
Stephen White.
Well, see, Paddy Keenan was my selection, so I feel like I should put him on if I'm putting anybody on.
I feel like we're putting pressure on Ronan here, but can I just say I thoroughly endorse this pressure. Like I'm in favour of it. But
this is their very last chance, Ronan, before this gets cast.
No, I'm sticking with my original selection. I put enough thought into it, so.
Okay, so the OTB Mount Rushmore for Louth is Steve Staunton, Rob Kearney, Tommy McConville and Tony Soxburn. It's not bad. And in fairness, Steve Staunton kind of doubles as a GAA man as well. I think the GAA crowd are definitely going to be claiming him.
Not bad for like the smallest patch of land ever existed and the smallest known people to mankind. So well done to you all.
Yeah, and Tommy McConville won a county title as well with Steve Staunton. So like we do have the clans would be pretty happy with the representation anyway.
It's the perfect representation of modern Louth.
As reparations for 2010, we should get Martin Sludden to carve this mountain into the Curly Mountains, if that's all right by everybody.
He can crack the champagne on it. That is it for Louth Mount Rushmore.
OTB AM's Mount Rushmore.
Right, my thanks to Dan and Ronan for bringing us that. The next Mount Rushmore, we'll tell you about that, is coming next week for you. But that's all from us from OTB AM. Off the Ball's back in your radios tonight from 7 o'clock. Wednesday Night Rugby with Keith Wood and Sean Fitzpatrick. A feature-length interview where Sean Fitzpatrick talks about his entire career. The football show has Pat Nevin on it. We're back tomorrow from 7:30 AM. Anthony Moyles, Tommy Walsh and much more as well. You can subscribe to the OTB AM podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Gangs of London star Joe Cole and Louth's Mount Rushmore were the highlights today. We'll see you tomorrow. Best of luck.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.